And hello everyone, welcome back to another tutorial. So in this course we'll actually be talking about CSS, or in other words, cascading style sheets. Now before we actually get into anything, what should you know in order to follow along with this course? You should know HTML. You should have a basic understanding of HTML and how HTML works. Either HTML or XML, but HTML is generally the one you want to know. I do have a full HTML course right here actually. I'll leave a link to this in the description. It's a full HTML crash course, which is 3 hours, and you'll know everything you need to know about HTML. So if you know HTML, you're ready to learn CSS, so cascading style sheets. CSS is what you use to make HTML look good. Because HTML sucks, it looks terrible, it's awful. I never like just looking at pure HTML because it doesn't have any eye candy, and you need that. So I'm going to give you a quick example of CSS to kind of get you introduced to what we'll be working with. So here I have an HTML page. This is linked up to my auto refresh plugin I have. So here if I go to my extensions, live server, then here we go. This is the extension I'm using and it will automatically refresh this for me. So when I make a change here on the page or on my CSS, it will refresh. Cool. Now you can create a CSS file. I called mine style.css. You can call yours whatever you want, but style.css is just what I'm using here. As long as it ends in .css, you'll get syntax highlighting and whatnot. Next up, you want to link this CSS file to this HTML file. There are multiple ways you can do this. First of all, if you want to use CSS, you can actually do it here. For example, style is equal to, and then here you can put valid CSS. Color, red. This is valid CSS. If I save this, the text color will be red. It's very easy to read. It's just color. What color do you want it to be? And then the color name, red. An alternative method you can use is the style tag, and this will apply styling without needing a CSS file. So here we can say h1, this is called a selector. We are selecting this h1 element right here. So this h1 is selecting this one here. If you have multiple h1s, then it will select both the first and the second one. It will select all of the h1s. So we say color green, then both of them will be green. But if I change this to an h2, one will be green because the other one does not have style assigned to it. We'll get deeper into this concept as we go along, but this is just so you understand a little bit. However, these two methods are generally not recommended. They're usually recommended if you have minor tweaks or your website is really small and you don't plan for it to be very big. What you should have is the CSS file instead. I'm going to copy this or just cut it and paste it here. So now the CSS is in this file. Let's make this blue so you can actually see the change. I'm going to remove this and then we should link it. We can go link and this will link a style sheet and we can just say style.css. Note that this style.css is in the same folder as this index.html. They're in the same folder. If I save, my text is blue because the style CSS says blue. We will be using a file for most of this course, but you could use any of these methods I've shown you. The inline method where you change them specifically depending on the element, or the one where you have a style tag here and you put CSS in here, or its own file, whichever you prefer. But that's the basics. CSS just helps us to change how our HTML looks and makes our HTML look better. And that's the basics of CSS. That's what it is. It's just a style sheet. You're just giving it a bunch of rules. CSS is incredibly easy. As you can see, it's straightforward. It's color and then the color name. And it's like this for everything. Let's say you want to change this font size. You can just say font-size. And here you could say large. Now large here in this case isn't a lot, but you could also use pixels. For example, 20 pixels or 60 pixels. We'll get into pixels, rem and whatnot later, but this is an idea. So you'll see everything is straightforward and really easy to learn. I'm going to use this style tag here just so we can see the HTML as well as the CSS, but you could of course use this style CSS file instead. I'm just going to clear it for now. Alright, now what exactly is a selector? We covered this a little bit in the previous tutorial. Let's say we have a p tag with some lorem. So this p tag can be selected with a selector. So if I say p with open brackets and closing brackets, these should be squiggly brackets, then I have selected this p tag. And here I could do something such as color red. And now it will make the color of the text red. So we selected this p tag with its selector. And before we continue, one thing you might want to take note of is comments. Comments uses this syntax, so /*/. Anything between these will not be read by CSS. These are for you to understand what's going on in your code. For example, here I can say this makes the text color red. Then let's say 5 years down the line, I come back to this project and I wonder, what does this do? And it's like, this makes the text color red. Comments can be used to help future you or someone else reading your code to understand it. And of course, these comments also last multiple lines. So if we do this, you can see as long as it's within these, it will not be read and it will last multiple lines. But take note, if I were to say color blue here and I were to remove that, my bad, then as you can see, it will not make the color blue. That's because in a comment, nothing gets read. This is for you and you alone. Cool. Now another type of selector you can get is with the HTML ID. So here we could go and give this h1 an ID of main title. Now I can select this by just going hashtag for the ID and then main-title. And this will apply styling to the element with this ID. So here I can say font size 2 rem, or actually let's go 3 rem since 2 rem is about the same size. Yeah. So now you can see it will apply styling, but only to this h1 because it has this ID. Now you might be wanting to apply the same styling to multiple elements. Now the problem is, you could go h1 and you apply the styling for h1, and in p then you apply the same styling for p. But see, the problem with this is this will select all of the h1s and this will select all of the p tags. To give you an example, this color red on this p, if I were to copy and paste this will also be red. Whilst with this h1, and we just remove this ID, you'll notice this h1 does not have the same styling as this h1, because this one used an ID selector, whilst with this p tag it used an element selector. So it selected this element, so all of the p tags are modified, whilst here only the element with this ID. But you may also know from HTML that you shouldn't give multiple elements the same ID. IDs should be unique. However, for multiple elements, you could give them a class. A class can be the same on multiple elements. For example, if I go here, I can say class is equal to and subtitle. Now to select a class in CSS, you can go dot subtitle. So anything with a dot for a class, anything with a hashtag for IDs, and the element itself is for the elements. Then here we could say color blue and font size 1 rem. So now you'll see the color is blue and the font size is 1 rem. And now you're also following good practice, because now multiple classes can be added to elements and apply the same styling instead of having to use multiple IDs, which you should not be doing. A somewhat more complex way of going through this is you can also do something such as h1.subtitle. This means it will only target the h1 elements with this class. So if I copy and paste this h1, you'll see it also gets modified, but this h2 will not. And as you can see here, it actually tells you it will need an h1 with this class on it. You also have the universal selector, which affects all the elements on this page. So that will be an asterisk. Meaning if I do something such as text align and I say it's center, so this will align text to the center, everything will be aligned to the center. So this affects everything on the page. Now let's say you want to select multiple elements. I'm just going to clean up here a bit. You want to select multiple elements and apply the same styling. However, you do not want to apply that same styling to all of the elements. For example, let's put in h3 here. This is some text. So what we want to do is we want to apply the same styling to the p tags, the h1 tags, and the h3, but not the h2. One way you can do it is say p, and here we say color blue, font size 1.4 rem, and we'll get into this rem and pixels and stuff later. You don't have to worry about that now. And then you could copy this and paste it for h1 and h3. This will work. So as you can see, now they're all the same styling. However, this is kind of unnecessary code duplication, because let's say you want to change the font. Now you want to make it 1.5, but now you have to change it in multiple places, which is somewhat annoying to do. What you could do is say p, h1, h3. This order doesn't matter, but this will select all of them at the same time. So here I could say 1.1 rem. All of them will be affected at the same time. So this way, if all of them share the same styling, then you can use this to style all of them at once. Another thing you can do is something such as div p. You'll notice when we hover over it, it says div with any of its children being a p tag, and it will gain this styling. So nothing here has that styling, but if I were to say div and then pass this p tag into this div, this p tag will get that styling. But you'll notice if we go div and put another p tag here, and here we can also put some lorem, this p tag will also be affected. If you only want this div's children to be affected, that is specifically a p tag, you can use this symbol right here, this bigger than symbol. This means it should be specifically a p tag of this div. So if we were to say section here, save that, then you'll notice this div has a p tag which is blue, so you'll see blue. But in section, it does not have that. But if we were to remove this, you'll notice the one in section also gets it. So this here will affect all of the p tags inside of that div, even if it's children of something else. This will make sure that the p tag has to be a direct child of this div. Meaning also if you were to do this, it will be blue, as you can see. But since this is a different tag, its children will not be selected. You also have this plus. Now if you hover over it, you'll see div and then p. This means the div with direct element following it should be a P. So right here, you'll see this div here, everything inside of it is normal color. But this P, because it's directly following this div, it will be blue. So here, if we were to say span instead and put some text here, this will no longer be applied because it is not directly following a div. And take note, if this is a lot for you to take in at this moment, you don't have to remember this continuously. As you practice CSS, you'll start remembering this like second nature. So if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by all of this information, don't be. You will remember it over time. You also have the tilde. If you hover over it, you'll see P and then a bunch of dots, or div and a bunch of dots and P. So if we were to have multiple P tags here, like this, you'll notice it's also blue. If we were to change this to plus, only the first one following would be blue. If we make it a tilde, all of them following this div element will be blue. So even if you break it by going span as an example, it will still make all of the P tags following this div blue. Because this means all of the P tags after this div has been selected should be blue. And take note, this could be a class value. This could be some sort of class or some sort of div. ID, I mean. But I'm just using a div to keep it simple. And then finally, let's take a look at attribute selectors. So let's, for example, say we have an A tag. Or let's go with this P here. And here we might have a link. And we say that can go somewhere. And we can just put this $ in there. And then we can have another A tag. This A tag also goes somewhere. In this case, we don't care. And it links this word. But this link, we wanted to go to a different page. So we say target underscore blank. So this will target this to a new tab. If I click on here, it's actually going to tell me, do you want it to pop up because I have an extension. If I say yes, it's going to open up a new tab. If I click this one, it's going to try and open it up on the same page. Now let's say I want to color my A tags. However, let's make this red. However, I don't want my A tags, or I don't want this A tag to be colored. I only want those that goes to a new page. So when you click on them, it opens up a new tab. I only want those to actually be this styling. To do that, we can use this. Anything in here would be an attribute. So if I say target, then any A tag with the target attribute like this will be affected. So as you can see, only this one is affected because it has a target attribute attached. If this was href, then all of them would be attached because href is both. But you have target, only those with the target attribute is selected. You can also specify specific target because let's say we have a target here and this target is underscore parent, then both of them will be selected. But let's say you only wanted to target underscore blank. Then you could say target is equal to, and in quotation marks, underscore blank. Now it will only apply the styling to the A tag with the target that says underscore blank. And you can of course use this with a lot of other elements as well that has attributes. Let's start off with just selecting this P tag. And we've done this already quite a lot, so color red. And this is applying color with this specific word. So this is CSS color names. You can do something like tomato as well. Give it a tomato-ish color, orange, blue, whatever. So this is very simple CSS coloring. You also get color values, such as RGB, hexadecimal, and HSL. And there are more, but I'm not going to cover more of them. Let's say you want RGB. You already know what RGB is. Red, green, blue. Your keyboard might be RGB. So this defines how much the red, the green, and the blue should be. Where 0, on all three, the red, the green, and the blue, will provide black. And where the maximum value, 255, that's the maximum value they can all be. this will provide white. And of course you can choose things in between. So let's say you want, let's make them all 0 again. Let's say you only want red. That will be 255, the maximum red. Let's say you only want green. That will be in the middle, 255. So because red, green, blue. That will be fully green. And let's say you want blue, 255. Blue. And of course you can mix and match. So here we could go 76, which will give a purplish blue. And here we could maybe go 90. And it will give a lighter blue. And here we could even say 100. And now it will give you this grayish color. Usually you can just play around with this, see what you like, see what you don't. VS Code even gives us a nice little dragger here, which we can use to change the coloring how we want. Save that. Now we have this greenish color. And then finally, you could also add another one here, A. This means opacity. So here, if we go 0, you'll see it turns invisible. It's still there, but it's invisible because the alpha channel, the opacity, is 0, 1 being the maximum. Would have made more sense if it was 255 also, but 1 is the maximum. And then here we go 0.5, then it will be half see-through. So this makes it see-through. But that's also for a later tutorial, a bit more complex. Then you have hexadecimal, which is usually defined with 6 letters after a hashtag. This case, if means white, where 0000000 means black. Now let me break this up for you. So first of all, the lowest is 0, and it can go up until 9. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right? Then you jump into letters. So A, B, C, D, E, F. So this is all of the values one of these can hold, from 0 up until F, where F is the lightest and 0 is the darkest. Now, when we go like this, we have hashtag 000000, where this first part would be red, green, blue. Same, RGB. So this will be red, green, and blue. Where this first two will represent red. So if the first two was FF, it will be red. Just like with RGB, where the first one was 255, it would be red. Here, FF means red. Because 00 here, and we make this here, then it will be blue. So these two define how that specific color will look. So if I go F5, now we get a pinkish color because this red isn't fully red. If we go 00, this red only translates to, it does translate to red, but you'll notice if we take a look here, if it will stay up, there we go. So it's not completely red. If you see there's a little space there because it was changed a little bit. And of course you could do something like F0. Let's take a look here. There's a larger space. And of course you could change these to how you want. So I can go 55 and then also 0F. And this will give this orangish color here. These are the ones you will usually mostly be working with, unless you get into the more complex things where you'll start using HSL and stuff like that, which is hue, saturation, and lightness. I'm not going to cover HSL, but you can go and read up on this if you want to. But for me, I generally don't work out of RGB, hexadecimal, and just the color value name, so green, for example. Also with hexadecimal, you can slim it down to 3, so FFF, and now each value will only have one letter referring to it. So here if I were to say 0, and as you can see, these two are at full, but this one is not full, so then you get this bluish color. If you do this, then it will be completely blue. You can also add an alpha channel to it, so if you go 0 here at the end, it will be unseeable because that's the alpha channel, and if you make this F again, then you get to see everything. And so it's kind of like RGBA, which we covered, but just in F format, you know. But it's up to you. You'll get more comfortable with it as the more you use it, because you'll see the more you use it, the more you'll start to just remember how it works and figure it out. Cool. Now let's take a look at the backgrounds while we're at it. Backgrounds allows you to set background colors to things. For example, let's say I want to add a background color to this text. Well, then I can go background color, and here we could go hashtag F0F, which will translate to this pinkish color. Now you'll see it has a background color. You could also specify background image, and here we could say URL, and we can just specify the image, so image.jpg, so this image right here. Now if I save that, you'll see there's a background image there now. If this text was longer, so let's say lorem times 30, you'll see this. It actually repeats here, so you'll see it right here, there's like a line, and you'll see this happening quite often. So you'll see it constantly repeats. And we'll tweak that in a second, where we can go background repeat. And here we could say no repeat. Now the background will not repeat. Once it ends, it ends. You can also say the background position, so background position, and we could say right bottom, so it will be positioned at the bottom right of this. So if we go down here, now you'll see it's there at the bottom and it starts here at the right side. Of course, you can fit all of this within this one background argument like this. So where you have your URL, then you can specify the position, so right bottom, and you can also specify if it should be repeating. There we go. So now we did the same thing, but now it's in one line instead of having to break it up into multiple smaller lines. You can also specify the background size, so background size, and we could do something like 100 pixels, 100 pixels. And now you'll notice it's much smaller, and we can actually just bring this back up here to the top, and there we go. And then of course, if you remove the no repeat, it will constantly repeat. You can also make it stretch and do a bunch of cool things. So instead of saying 100 pixels, you could say contain. And now you'll see it stretches it until the end here. So it contains this whole image, and then it starts over once it's here at the end of the image. So it stretches the image to its original aspect ratio. But you can also do cover, and this will stretch it to fill in this whole thing without having to repeat. So as you can see here. There's of course a lot more that you can do with backgrounds and stuff in CSS, but I believe this basics can open up a lot of doors for you, and you can see for yourself what you would like to do. Just a note, if you ever use a background image on text, if you're going to use it like this, make sure that the background image is either a dark color and the foreground, so the text, is a light color, or vice versa. Because here you'll see the text is a dark color, so if it goes over here, you can't see it, you have to highlight it. And of course, I would generally not recommend doing this, like with this big. Maybe like a watermark type of image, it could be good, like with just a little logo in the middle. But this specifically, not so great. Cool, I'm going to copy this ID, go to style.css, and if you remember from the previous videos, we go like that. We use the ID selector, which uses a hashtag, and there we go. Now we have selected an ID. Now of course we can do things like color red, just to make sure it works, and there we go. Remember, you need to refresh your page if you do not have an auto refresh extension installed. So if I make changes here, it just auto refreshes for me. But if you make changes, you might have to click the refresh button. Alright, now let's get started with creating a border. Now we can actually start by saying border style. And here we can say how a border should look, such as solid. This will give it a solid border around the text here. So this whole div here, it has a border. And you can of course give it a bunch of different stylings, such as dotted. That will make it a dotted styled border. Or double, that's a double border. Or groove, that's a groove border. Or you could say none if it should have no border, this is generally by default, or hidden if it should have a border but it should be hidden. But it can become way more powerful. For example, let's say we have a solid border. We can add more to this. So let's say this time we now add a dashed. Now here we have a dash border on this side and the rest is solid. So just these two are dashed. However, we can also add another one. Dotted. Now, dashed, solid, dashed, dotted. So it starts from the top, so this one will be at the top. Then the second one will cover the sides. If it's just two, then the first one will cover the top and bottom. And then the side to side for the second one. And if there's three, it will cover the top, the first side will be dashed, bottom will be dotted, and then this side will be dashed again. And then if you want to change the final one as well, meaning this one right here, you can give it a value such as ridge. So now here's a ridge, here's a solid, here's a dashed, and here's a dotted. So it goes from the top and it goes in this clockwise, I believe, orientation. So like that, you can specify different types of borders. Let's say you don't want a border on one side, then just say none. Now there's no border here at the bottom. Now let's say we just have a border style of solid, just so you can see what's happening. You can also give it a border width of, let's say, 5 pixels. Now the border will be more thick. Anyhow, so you can make the border width more like this. You can also specify if you don't like working with numbers, you could specify things like medium. Now it's a medium border. Without it, it will be the smallish border. With it is a little bit bigger. Or thick. Now it's a thick boy. And this also applies to basically any border you have. So if we say dashed, it's going to give you thick dashes. And just like with the border styling, you can also specify per size. So let's say thick, medium, 1px, and 10px, like that. This one will be 10px, this one will be a thick boy, this one will be a medium boy, and this one will be 1px. So it follows the same structure that the previous border style did. Then you can also specify a border color. So let's make the border with, let's actually remove it for this. And let's go back to solid. So you can also say border color. And the border color can of course be, like here as VS Code gives me a bunch of colors. Let's say blue. Now the border will be blue. Let's say red. Border will be red. Hashtag 0f0, the border will be green. Because red, green, blue. And of course we can make this bigger, like something like that, and now it will give us a bluish color. And again, this can go for all 4 borders again, same as with the border style and border width. So we can say red, orange, and let's go RGB, 10, 70, 200. There we go. Now, this one's a little too blue. Let's make it a different color. Let's just hover over this. Let's make it yellow. There we go. Save it, and there we go. So now each side is a different color. Now, you don't necessarily have to do it in one line. Some people, such as I, struggle with this sometimes because I forget that it goes in a clockwise position and whatnot. So what I prefer to do is instead I like to go border, top. And now I know I'm specifying the top border. I will always know I'm specifying the top border. And here I can specify the color, the width, the radius, whatnot. So if we go and say style, we can say the style should be dashed, for example. Now the top will always be dashed, and here we specify top. And you can do this with all sides. So border top, bottom, and left, right. And I would like to make the left and right colors just so we can play around with that. So color, and here let's just make the whole thing blue for now. And in the bottom border style, I want that to be ridge. The left color I would like to be pink, and the right color I would like to make magenta. Save that, and now it was much easier to know what I'm going to modify. So by default, my border style everywhere is going to be solid, but for the top and for the bottom it's different. So the bottom is ridge. It's actually a little bit difficult to see. Let's try to do dotted. There we go. So for the bottom it's dotted, and for the top it is dashed, and we specify for the top and bottom. And in here for the left and right we actually specified colors, but we could also specify the style, so it should be dotted or dashed. Same with the top and bottom, we could also specify the colors, and you can see it's pink and magenta. So some may prefer this. It's a little bit more writing, but it's also easier to understand for those of you who struggle. Now, if you don't like writing a lot, you think that writing a lot is truly awful, what you could do is you could move all of this into one command. So let's actually just remove all of this because there's quite a lot. Border 1px solid black. Now I have your 1 pixel in width, solid border of the color of black. Red. Now the border will be red. 1 pixel is not a lot, so let's go 3. There we go. So now I have a 3 pixel border that is of solid type. This could be dashed and red. So this is all in one line. Instead of needing 3 lines to define this, you have 1 line. And of course, let's say you just want to specify a specific side, border dash left. Now only the left border will be red dashed and bordered. And this of course again goes for all sides. Alright, now let's take a look at border rounding. So let's go solid, and this doesn't need to be just on the left, we can go border. Here we go. Now let's say you want to make your website look a bit more modern, and these days we like seeing circles and rounded corners and stuff like that. So what we could do is we could use border radius. Now this will allow us to give a border radius. If we say 1 pixel, we're not going to see much of a difference. But if we say something like 10 pixels, then now you'll see it's being bordered into a little bit more of a circle-ish. We can also go 5 pixels if it's too much. Now it's not as much as what it was. We could go and say 100 pixels, and now it's incredible, and now it's like a pill. So however much you wanted, you just increase the value here, and I will create you a border radius. For in this case, I think 5 was actually perfect. So now it's nice rounded, not too rounded like with 10, because that's a little bit too much, but some may like that. And also take note, this border will resize with your div. So if I put more lorem here, as you can see, the whole border did resize. Now the text shadow property adds a shadow to text as it says. So let's get a simple little bit of text in here. Let's go some P and let's put lorem in here. Then here we can select the P tag and we can give it a text shadow. And here will actually autocomplete for me. So it's 1 pixel, 1 pixel, 1 pixel black. When I save this, you'll notice our text looks almost like a little bit bigger. It's because of the text shadow. We can of course make this something like red. Now the shadow of the text is red. If you don't specify anything, it will automatically be black, as you can see there. And you only need to specify the first 2 if you really want to. You do not need to specify the third value, and we'll get to what these values mean. And we can specify something like red, and now we'll only display the color, and we'll not use the third value. So let's first talk about these values. This is the x-axis of the shadow, and this is the y-axis of the shadow, and this is of course the color. So let's say the y-axis is 5 pixels. Now you'll notice it went downwards because x is left to right, y is up to down. And if we increase the size here, we can see it better, and there we go. So the shadow is going downwards. And of course here, if we made this 5 as well, then we'll go more to the left. And there we go. Let's put this back to 1 pixel and 1 pixel. And now I'll notice it's much simpler to see once it's been increased in size. Now you can add a blur effect to this shadow, because usually when you look at a shadow, it's not this amount of visible. So you could add a blur effect by giving the third property such as 1 pixel, which will give it a 1 pixel blur. As you can see, it's already nice and blurry. Or we can go 5 pixels and now it'll be very blurry, and so on. Now we can of course take something like this, and if we were to make the color of it white and the background color, we will just keep that black or black. It seems that the text shadow color itself is the same as the text color, so if you do not specify it, it will be the same. Anyhow, then as you can see, now there's like this nice blur on the text, so it almost gives you the illusion of glowing text. If we make the blur a little bit less, then it will be easier to see as well. Now you're not limited to just this X and Y shadow. You can add another shadow. As an example, here we could go 0, 0, meaning do not go anywhere, just be on the text itself. Let's go to a blur of 5 pixels and let's make it hashtag F0F, and that would be a pinkish purple. So now you have two, you have one that's black and you have one that is pinkish purple. We of course make this black one stand out a little bit more, and we can also make this 0 pixels and 0 pixels, and there we go. So now there's two text shadows on here. Of course, if you wanted to, let's say, have the same shadow but on two different sides, then you could do something like this. And here, instead of doing 0, 0, you go -1 or negative whichever value. That means it will go negative and then to the place you want to go. So for example, if 1 pixel is the first one, then it will go to the left. But if it's -1, it will go to the right, because the x-axis. It's like you might have learned in school. If we were to open up our drawing app here, we have this. This is our x and this is our y. And it's like in school where you have one, or it will actually go the other way around, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then here you have -1, -2, -3, and so on. So it's basically the same as this. And you always start here in the center, and depending on what your value is that you give it, it will go left, right, up, or down. So it's just like one of those charts you used to do in school. So we were to say -1, -1, and let's also make this black. Then now there's a shadow going up and left, as well as a shadow going down and right. And we'll both give it a blur of 1 pixel. Then it will also produce pretty nice text. Now, of course, you're not limited to just this, just 2 of them. You can have up to 4 where you specify, or even more probably, where you specify each and every side. So I could go here and I could literally just make this 1 pixel black, -1 pixel black. But you will of course need to specify more than one, as this would be like 0 and then -1, 0. Of course you can copy this, and this will be 0, 1, and then 0, -1. And now you basically created a border around the text. So it will start by going X, 1 pixel, so left or right. Then it will go left, and then it will go down, and then it will go up, because it's X, and then Y, X, Y, X, Y. Now as for text shadow, it is very simple. It's just adding a pixel amount of shadow to text. Let's talk about the box shadow. So we can remove that. And let's select our margined div here. Now a box shadow adds a shadow to a box element, such as a div. So we can say box shadow, and we can say, let's say 10 pixels, 10 pixels, and specify color, and there we go. If you zoom out a little bit, yeah, let's maybe just also give a little bit of a margin. So margin 1 rem, there we go. Now you can see it better. So here we see there's the shadow, and we could of course make the background color, just so we can see it better, equal to something like red. And now here you can see the shadow of this box. Now just like the text shadow, the box shadow also has a blur. So we could go 5 pixels and that will blur it. Or we can make this a little bit smaller as well, like that. And now the shadow is a little bit closer to the box itself. But here we also have another property. We have the spread property, which defines a spread radius. Basically, it will spread the shadow almost like smudging it a little bit. A positive value will increase the size of the shadow, and a negative one will of course make it smaller. So here we could add 5 pixels, and now you notice that the shadow got bigger. If we were to go negative 5 pixels, then it would actually get smaller. And just like the text shadow, you can also specify multiple shadows. So here we can do this, go like that, and if you specify negative here, it will make a shadow on both ends, as you can see. And just like with text shadow, you can specify multiple, so it doesn't have to be 2, it can be 4, 3, how many ever shadows you want to apply. You can also make the shadow on the inside of this box. As an example, if we go here and just specify inset, then here there's a shadow on the inside, but note it starts from this point here. Not this point here, but this point here. If you wanted to start from this point here, you can use negative. So go like that, and now we'll start here from the inside. And of course here you can also go inset, and I will also make it that shadow go on the inside. So now there's 2 shadows and they're both on the inside. So let's first create, well, let's just keep this div here. And let's remove this box shadow. And let's just rather give it a border of 1px solid. And let's go red. Right, and let's maybe make it a little bit more, so maybe 3 pixels. There we go. And red is actually a little bit difficult to see. Let's go green maybe. That's even worse. Okay. We can't win. That's fine. I will stick with red. I'm assuming everyone can see that red there. We can also zoom in just a little bit. There we go. Alright. So here we have a box and it has a border. Very simple. So very simple. Now first let's talk about padding. Now padding is the space on the inside. So from top to bottom. So where the text starts here and from left to right. So with this knowledge we can know that padding left will affect this area between where this text first starts and the side of the box. So if we were to say 100 pixels, then it will have a padding here of 100 pixels. If we were to make it 16 pixels, then it would be a bit more. We can of course make it padding 16 pixels, and this will apply 16 pixels to all corners, the top, the left, the bottom, and the side. That's padding. Padding is just when you have a box, then that is from the top corner, the left, or the top side, the left side, the right side, the bottom side. Basically this space here, that is the padding. Now similarly, you also have something like a margin. Let's create another div around this div so you can see the margin. Now we can go id is equal to margin. Alright, we can go here and we can say margin border 6px solid hashtag 000. Okay, so there is something here, you just can't see it, but there is actually a border there. If I were to make it bigger, you'll be able to see it. Now here we can also give it a padding such as this, and this is why we can't see it. We go solid, then there we go. I said sold instead of solid. But yeah, so if we remove it, you can see it there, and if we give it a padding, as you can see, it will pad this inwards. Now similarly, a margin is the opposite. So where a padding is the inside of this box, the inside, the margin is the outside. So if we said margin 16 pixels, now the outside of this box has 16 pixels attached. But take note that this margin here and this padding here, they are not the same. If I were to put a padding here, it will add to this margin, because this margin here is part of this box here, whilst this padding here is part of this box, as you can see. So margin is on the outside, so it will add spacing on the outside of boxes, whilst padding will add spacing on the inside of boxes. And when I say boxes, I actually mean any sort of HTML element, because in the end of the day, all of them are just, in a sense, a box. Even a p tag. So if we were to convert this into a p tag, you'll see it's also just a box. Anyhow, so that is the basics between margin and padding. It's as simple as that. Margin is the outside, whilst padding is the inside spacing. And of course, if you wanted to, you can go 0, 0, 10 pixels. This is perfectly fine. And here we can go 0, 16 pixels, 0, 0. So you'll notice that this one-liner method also works, but you can also do something like margin top, and you can modify it with this. But yeah, so the higher this number, the larger this spacing. So 30, that's a large spacing. But yeah, that's the basics, all you needed to know. Margin on the outside, padding on the inside. So in this tutorial, we'll be talking about units. So let's say we want to set the width of something. Then we can use units to set the width. For example, here we have, let's say, 16 pixels of margin, right? So here, that's 16 pixels. Now, I could also go 1 rem. 1 rem is about equivalent to 16 pixels. Or 1 em. Very similar to rem, but not quite the same. There are a lot of these like measurements. We can even go centimeters. For example, I think that's about 1 centimeter. Actually, it's less. So we can even go things like centimeters. Can we go meter? Probably not. You can go millimeter though. Anyhow, the point is, there's a lot of measurement units that we can use, such as pixels, em, rem, centimeters, millimeters, and I believe it's about time we cover them. Now, let's start from the top. First of all, we get millimeters. I believe most of us know about that. We get centimeters. Most of us know about centimeters. For those of you who lives in the Americas, you have inches. You also get PT for points. Then you get PC. Most of these are kind of irrelevant. It's very dependent on what you prefer. You can go search up what you prefer most. And then you have things like PX. Now, PX is very special. Pixels will change depending on the device viewing it. For example, let's say you have a TV. A 1 pixel on a TV might be bigger than 1 pixel on a monitor. So generally it is discouraged to work with pixels because of this. Because just because something looks good on your screen, if you're using pixels, the chances are it might not look good on a different screen, because pixels do not scale well. That is why in general, we always recommend that you use EM or rem. There are other measurements and stuff you can use, but generally I prefer rem. And you have your own things you can prefer. Some relative lengths that we would recommend is like, let's start with EM. So you have like EM, and this is relative to the font size of the element. So 2 EM will be 2 times the font size of the element. So if I go here and I say font size should be 20 pixels, and then here we go 2 EM, now that will be about 40 pixels. So if we go 40 pixels, you won't see a difference. So EM is relative to the font size of the element. Meaning if I say font size is 1, or that's 10, but if I say 1, you'll see it also decreases. Now pixels as well, they can also use rem. So for example, 1 rem as an example, or 1 EM is a little bit weird, but yeah, 1 rem would be good as well. And we'll get to rem in a second. Now as for rem sets the relative font size of the root element. In a sense, it takes the browser's default font size you could think of. Meaning rem will rarely ever change, and it will scale nicely depending on the screen because of how font sizes work. So it depends on what you prefer. I prefer rem over EM just because rem has a smaller chance of ever changing, where with EM, that will change depending on the font size of the current element. It's depending on what you prefer, but I prefer rem. But you also have other things, such as And let's go here and say EX. So this is relative to the X height of the current font. Very rarely used. And then you have things like CH, which is relative to the width of the 0 character. So relative to the width of this thing, 0. Again, that's kind of on what you prefer. Something I see a lot is vertical width. So this will give you basically one vertical width is 1% of this width here. Meaning, if I make my browser any longer, you'll notice this top part here, it grows. So here it is just about as big as my cursor. Now if I were to go like this, you'll see it gets bigger. So VW means vertical width. So 2 vertical width is 2% of the vertical width here. So 100 would be, of course, this entire vertical width like this. And if you flip it, you'll get that. The same can be good for vertical height. So now it will be 1 page height. If we go 10, then it will be 10% basically of the page height. I do see these used quite often, but it's up to you which you prefer. You also get things like Vmin, Vmax, and then finally you get percentage, which is what I prefer. So for example, 10%. And those are a few units you might want to know about. Primarily, if you're just getting started with CSS, you can actually just stick with pixels if you find that fairly simple. Otherwise, I recommend rem. You can think of rem as 16 pixels is about equal to 1 rem. And rem rarely ever changes, so I would always recommend staying with that. But EM is also a favorite of a lot of people. So you might want to go for EM instead. Depending on which you prefer. Again, it generally doesn't matter which you use. Just keep in mind that some lengths may change depending on like the person's screen size and pixel density and whatnot. So in our HTML, let's actually just remove this and let's just keep this div here. And in here, we can just talk about this margined div. We can also put a little bit of lorem in here. There we go. And we can maybe make the background color cadet blue. There we go. So let's add a width here. Now widths can have multiple or different types of values in here depending on how you want to make the width or height. For example, we could say 200 pixels. And now it will only be 200 pixels in length. So from here to here, that's only 200 pixels. Or you could use 20%. This 20% is based off of the width of this window here. So if we do this, you'll notice it changes in width. You also have auto, which it is by default. Initial, which is basically sets it back to its default value. And inherit, then it will inherit it from its parent. So if its parent is a specific width, then this one will also be that specific width. Let's make this 50% and let's add in height as well. And we can make it 600 pixels. So width and height is really just so easy. But you should always take note that width and height, these properties do not include padding, borders or margins when they calculate the width or the height with it. So the width is the area inside the padding. So it is from where this blue starts to where this blue ends. That is the width. The padding and the border, those are two different things that are not related to the width and height or the margin. Now you also have things such as max width and max height. The max width property is used to set the absolute maximum width that an element is allowed to be. This is nice if you have an element that changes size over time depending on the screen size here. So let's say the width here is 70%. But let's say you don't want it to be at max longer than 500 pixels. Then you say max width 500 pixels. Meaning, if we do this, it won't increase, but if we go smaller, it will change in size. You can also have a min width. And a min width, let's say we make that 100 pixels. That means it cannot be smaller than that minimum width. So here it cannot grow bigger, and here it cannot grow smaller. We can even make it, to make it a bit more easy to notice, 200 pixels. And now it will notice it easier. Or 500, and now it can change it all. You can also have a min height and a max height that you can set to make it the width or the height that you need it as well. So you should not get confused. The width is what it changes into. So if we say 70%, that means the width may change depending on the resolution or the size of this window. But max width says, okay, you're allowed to change, but you're not allowed to go bigger than this width here. And min width says, okay, you are allowed to change, but you are not allowed to go under this in size. With width, you could also just give it a set value such as 500 or 600 pixels and just remove the max constraints. And it will work. But if you use something that changes over time, then you can force it to be in a specific size that you need. We'll later on get into changing the size of things depending on the screen resolution or screen size. That doesn't just involve percentages. But for right now, that's not too important. And that is it. Width and height is just so simple. All you need to do is you just set the width and height, but you also have the option to have a max width or a max height, as well as a minimum width and a minimum height. So let's just add a p tag here, just so we can use a little bit better convention. And let's select that p tag. And if you hover over this, you'll notice it selects the element with this ID and all of the p tags inside of it. Simply, if you want to change the color, you could say color green. And that will make the text green. You can also change the text background color, so background color, and let's make it black. And the text background color is black. You can also align the text to the center, so text align center, and now the text is aligned in the center. Let's just make this line so it's easier to see. Or you can align it to the right. By default, it is aligned to the left. So you can either do left, center, or right. You can also do text align justify, and this will make sure all of these lines here are aligned in a way that they're the same length. If I were to remove that, let's actually just add more text here. Lorem times 5. There we go. And let's also maybe add a little padding here. And my bad, that coloring is actually set here, so let's put the padding here. There we go. So you'll notice here at the end, they're all aligned equally. But if I remove this text align here, and I save it, then you'll notice they are no longer aligned like that. So by aligning justify, it will justify all of these so they're the same length, or that end at the same place here at the end. Now sometimes you want to align, but only the very last line of the text, so only this line here. You can then just do text align last, and let's say center. Now the last line in this paragraph here will be at the center, or right, or even justify. But justify in this case won't really do much unless it's a little bit longer. You can also change the text direction. So let's say text direction, or this is actually just direction, not text direction. There we go. And we say right to left. Now the text will be aligned right to left. Some languages have your text that should be read from right to left instead of the regular left to right, which is the default. So depending on how your text should be read, you could align it other way around. You can also use Unicode bidi and just say bidi override, and this will completely change the text direction of an element. So as you can see now, L is here at the end here, but if you remove that, L is here at the start, so lorem. Do that, now lorem is here, lorem. You can also add text decoration line, and let's say overline. This will add a line above all of these values here, all of the text. You also have underline, which will do the opposite and add a line underneath all of the text. So we save that, now it's underneath all of the text. So overline is above the text, underline is underneath the text. You also have line through, which is a strike through. And you can add multiple, so let's say line through, overline, and underline. And now there's one of each. You can also add a text decoration color, and let's say it should be red. And the decoration color of this, so the lines here, they will be red or pink or whatever you prefer. And you can also add a text decoration style. And here we could say by default it is solid, but we could say dashed. And now will be a bunch of dashes. Let's actually zoom in here. You'll notice they are now dashes instead of being solid. Or double, and now they're doubled. Dotted, wavy. Pretty cool, right? You can also set the text decoration thickness, and let's make it 5 pixels. That's nice and thick. And of course you can do all of this inside of one text decoration. So let's go, I'm just going to keep underline on this one. Red, wavy. I can just do that. And now I have red wavy underline here. And we could probably do 5 pixels here as well. And that will be 5 pixels in size. And of course, if you don't want any text decoration, you can just say none. And that will remove any text decoration from the text. You can also do text transformation, such as text transform uppercase. And now it's all uppercase. Or let's say we remove the casing here, so it's lorem with a lowercase l, but you want it to be capitalized. Let's say you want the first letter of each word to be capitalized, then you can just say capitalize. Now each letter of the first letter of the word will be capitalized. Or lowercase if you want everything to be in lowercase. Or text indent. And we can say 10 pixels. Now the first word here where it starts will be indented by 10 pixels or 50 or however much you want it to be indented with. Letter spacing will space all of the letters, so let's say it's 5 pixels. Now each letter will be spaced further away. Line height will set the height of each line, so let's say 1.5. And now each line is set 1.5 from each other, where 1 is the normal and let's say 0.5 is half of the normal, or 4 would be 4 times the usual. You can also do word spacing, so word spacing, and let's say that should be 10 pixels. Now each word is also spaced 10 pixels from each other. A little bit difficult to see that with the letter spacing, so let's just do that. And now I can see, let's actually make it a little bit more, 20. Now I can notice they're rather spaced out. And finally, let's remove the coloring here and all the other nonsense. And let's talk about text shadow. So text, shadow, and this is just like box shadow. So we have 2 pixels, and we can specify a color. As you can notice, the shadow is there. You can also specify blur. So 5 pixels, and now it's blurred. Just as the box shadow works basically exactly the same. And this here just means from the top. So if we were to make this 1 pixel, and we were to make this 0, and this 5, you'll notice now it's from the top. And here if we make this 5 and this 0, so this one means from the left and this is from the top. And this is the blur and this is the color. So here I have an image called image.jpg. I'm just going to import it into our project. There we go. So here is our image. Let's go to the CSS styling, and let's just make sure that this image, so you get image, does not go larger than, let's say, 400 pixels. There we go. That's pretty big. We can actually just zoom in a little bit. Alright, so here's the image. Now first you can set the border radius of the image to, let's say, 10 pixels. And now this image will have a nice border radius. And of course, the more you set it, the more circular it will be, such as 50%. Now we'll get an oval, as you can see there. If you want to make sure that this is not an oval and it's a circle, the width and the height should be the same. If the width and the height are not the same, then it will be an oval. Some images are by default the same width as the height. Other images like this one has a larger width than its height. Now you can also set an image to resize according to your screen size to make it more mobile friendly or just more responsive in general. By going with 100%. This means the width should just be 100% of this page. Here we just have a margined div here, which is having a little bit of a margin here, a little bit of padding, but that's fine. But now if I zoom out, the image will still stay the same. If I zoom in, I can actually just do this. You'll notice the image will resize along with the page. Unlike when we first started, where if we did this, the image would overflow. With this, the image will always be this width. So by using percentages, you can make it more responsive on more screens. Let's make the width 300 pixels. Now to center it, you can just go display block and then margin auto. And it will center the image for you right in the middle. Without display block, it will not go to the center, so you will need to use display block. You can change the transparency of an image by going opacity, where 1 will be full opacity so you can see everything, and 0.5 would be half, so now it will be half see-through, 0.1 then it will be mostly see-through, and in 0 it will be all see-through. For now let's just go 0.8 and this should be, actually just remove it. You also have a bunch of filters you can use, such as filter, grayscale, and this will grayscale, so make it white and black, and we can just say 100%. And now it will be completely grayscaled. You could of course just say 50%, and now it will be 50% on the way there, 90, that will be mostly, and so on. You can also set the blur of it, and let's make it 4 pixels. Now it will be a little blurry. 1 pixel will make it less blurry. 10 pixels will make it super blurry. Or you can set the brightness by, let's say, 25% of the original brightness. Now it will be a little bit more dark and gloomy. Or 150%, and now it will be extra bright. But without it, it will look like that. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but just know you basically have an entire image editing program right in CSS. But we can say invert, and let's just go 100%, and now it will be completely inverted in the color, so negative 10%, only somewhat, 50%, half of it, and then 100%, all of it. Now you have more such as contrast, hue rotate, saturation, sepia, drop shadow, all of these. You can also flip an image by going transform, scale X, and notice how this purple pink spot is here on the left side. When we go here and we set it -1, it will be on the right side. You can also go scale Y, and notice how this part here is at the top. If we were to say scale Y -1, it will be at the bottom. So you can flip it whichever way you want by using transform and scale X or Y. Now sometimes, let's say you set the width and the height, so height to 300 pixels. Now when you do that, it will stretch it in a way that some people may not like. To overcome that, you can say object fit cover. And now we'll keep the aspect ratio, and it will only show this here. So it won't make it stretch like it's doing now. It will instead make it full screen, but we can only see about 600 pixels in total here. So 300 here, 300 here, 300 here, 300 here. If you want everything to still be in here, you can use contain. And now it will make the entire image fit in here, but it may crop it down a little bit to make it all fit in. So even though it has a higher width and a higher height, it might not use all of it when you use contain, so it can fit everything in here. If you want it all to fit in there without it losing any of this, you can just remove it, and now it will stretch again. And that's basically what fill does. It's the default, it will just fill it. So you have cover, contain, and fill. A pseudo class is what is used when you want to define a special state of an element. For example, let's say when I hover over this image here, it should blur. That is a pseudo class. So let's say we have this. Now what we could do is we could say the margined image colon hover. This is a pseudo class. So we're saying when we hover with our mouse over this image, we want it to set the filtered blur to 4 pixels. So we hover over it, and you'll notice it blurs the image when we hover over it. This is the power of a pseudo class. It allows us to take a state in which an element is in and modify what happens when that state changes. So we're not hovering over it, but when we do, we set it to blur. For example, let's say here we have let's keep this margin here. Let's just put an A tag here, and it's gonna go nowhere, and we can say click me. Now this A tag specifically, and let's just select it like this, has a bunch of properties, such as link. This is when the link has not been visited yet. We can, let's say, set the color to red. Since it has not been visited yet, I have not clicked on it yet, it is red. We can also style it for visited. And let's make the color green if it has been visited. We can change the hover. Let's make it purple. And let's say we select the text. We can make it black. So here, if I hover over it, we get, and that should be selected for a second there, or active. For a second there I got confused, but that should be active. So now let's say here, when we hover over it, we get purple. Purple is a little bit difficult to see. Let's make it blue. So it's red when it just hasn't been visited yet. When you hover over it, we now get blue, like we say there. When we select it, and you'll notice if I right click on it, you'll notice it goes black for a second. So that's when we select it, it goes black, active, and then visited. So if I click on it, it now becomes green because it has been visited. Alright, let's jump over to maybe a few paragraph tags. So let's go P, and let's say lorem. Now we can create another div with a P tag in it that also says lorem. But this lorem, we can maybe make it go twice. And now we can also have another P in here. So P, I am cool. And let's have another P here that says I am not cool. Alright. When we go P colon and first child, let's make the color red. Now what this does is it takes the first P element that is in a div, or I believe we can even go here, P I am cool and P not so much. So the first P element, the first paragraph element that it finds in each div or each container will be the color of red. So in this case, this is the first P element inside of the body, so it will be red. This is the first P element inside of this div, so it will be red. This is the first P element inside of this div, so it will be red. So it selects the first element in each div, and it changes the color or whatever styling you put here. We've just mainly changed the color, but you can put any styling in here like as you want. You could even specify hashtag margin here, and now it will only apply this first child functionality to the ID of hashtag margin. So in here, this is the only place where it will do that. if we go div p check me, then check me will be red because it is the first p element inside of this div, which is in fact inside of margined. So by specifying here, you could say, okay, do this, but only to the p tags inside of the margined div. You also have a, let's just go p lang, and here you could specify a language of your choice, such as no, or I'm going to go JP, so let's say it's Japanese. And then I'm going to say the quotes, which will change the quotes that will be used in this specific piece of text from normal quotes to, let's say, I don't have a Japanese keyword, so I can't use their quotes. I'll just use these brackets here. Now, when we go here, and let's just clean up a little bit so we don't have as much. Whenever we specify lang, and let's say JP, so this is the JP that we found here, that we set there. When we do that, and we use it with the quotes tag, and my bad, here we should not specify a Q, we should specify a, or a P, we should specify a Q for quotes. And let's go here and say quote. Then now it will use these brackets as quotes instead of the usual, let's just make this a quote as well, quotation marks. So usually it would specify quotation marks. But in this case, it will specify brackets because here we say take the quotes, and if the lang is JP, so if this lang here, if that is JP, make the quotes use these instead. And that is just the beginning. There are so many of these. If we just go colon, you'll notice there's a ton of them that starts with this. And you can see there is so many here. Unfortunately, I cannot go through all of these in one video. But you can go and look through them and see, here's the last child. So if the first child did only the first p tag in a div, then the last child will do the last one. You know, most of these you can somewhat figure out. Visited, there's the one we did. There's first child, first of type, paused. You can check out all of these. But there's so many. You just need to find them. So a pseudo element is used when you want to specify the styling of a specified part in an element. For example, the styling of the first letter of a line, or to insert content before a piece of text or after it. Now, pseudo elements are very similar to pseudo classes in the sense that they use these. But instead of using one, which is for classes, we use colon. Another time, so 2 times, for element. So let's say we take a look at our p tag here. Make that a p tag again, which all it contains is some lorem for us. And let's just make sure the lorem is nice and long. So let's go lorem times 3. Now we have a lot of lorem to work with. Then in here we can say p : first line. So the first line, meaning from this whole part here is the first line. The first line, we can say the color should be red. And now the first line of this p tag has the color of red. And again, you can put almost any styling in here as you want. This is just normal CSS. You can put color in here, font size, word spacing, whatever you feel is right. Same here, you could say first letter instead of first line. And let's say we go font size is equal to 2 rem. So the first letter is nice and big. Now you can of course have multiple of these. So the one can be first letter, the other one can be first line. And let's say the first line has a color of pink. So you can have multiple of these pseudo elements attached, as you can see here. Now one thing you will often see being used is the colon before. This means put a few things before the content in this element, such as content I am cool. And I will put I am cool right before the content of this CSS or this p tag here. So now I am cool, and this will account for all p tags. So if we just go p hello, then I am cool will be before this p tag as well. You can do the same with after, and this will put things after. So now there will be I'm cool right after this p tag. Same here. I'm cool right at the end. You can also do selected or selection here. And let's say we go and make the color green and the background to red. Now whenever we select this, the color of the text would be green and the background of the selection would be red. And again, just like in the previous video, there are a ton of these laying around. These are just some of the most popular ones you'll see, such as I go like this and you'll see spelling error, slotted, shadow, and there's a bunch of MSs here, WebKit, first letter, first line, and you'll notice there's so many here. And this is just an introduction to show you things you can do with this CSS pseudo elements. So we already know about the list element in HTML, such as unordered list, and then you have an ally tag, and let's say pizza and burger and chips. There we go. This is an unordered list, very simple. Now let's start with styling this. I'm just going to select unordered list, and here we can say list style type, and by default it would be disk. So by default it is disk. However, you could go circle, and then it would be a same as disk, but just this time it is empty on the inside with just a border. Or you could go square, and that will make it a square. You can do the same with ordered list. So let's say we go OL here, where we have numbers, and here we could say, instead of this, we could say upper Roman. And this should of course be for ordered list. And there we go. So now we'll have Roman numbers. So we add more of this, which is pretty neat. You can also have the alphabet. So either upper or lowercase, lower alpha, upper alpha. So there's a lot here that you can select, of course, such as Georgian. And there we go. And you can just select whichever you prefer. I do believe you can also do Japanese characters in here. But yeah, so there's a lot you can do here to order or to style your lists. You can also put an image here. I do have an image.jpg. So if I wanted to, I could go here, specify URL, and then say image.jpg. And instead of list style type, you say image. And here we go. The image is just very big, but you get the idea. So there's pizza, go to the next one. There's burger. If we actually resize it a little bit, we'll be able to see more. Yeah, so it's very small now, but you'll notice it's still all there. You can just, of course, resize the image, which isn't too much of an issue. And then, yeah, it should be better. Now, of course, if you wanted to, you could also remove the default settings, such as here with an ordered list. You get the numbers, but you could say list style type none. And now it will just remove those styling. Or potentially you could go margin 0 and padding 0. And now you'll also notice they are no longer restrained to what was the sides here. You can also specify the position of these lists. So list style position. And if we say outside, then this list style position would be on the outside, which is by default. So the numbers here, they're on the outside. And we can also say inside. And I'll notice it also indents it a little bit because now it's on the inside. If we were to bring this back, you'll notice now, because they're on the inside, they will no longer go off the screen. To give an example, if we go here and say list item, we say border 1px solid black. And then here, if we were to remove this, then you'll notice it's on the outside of this border. But if we put this here, it will be on the inside. And that is about all there really is to lists. They're very simple, but you can add a little bit of styling here and there to make it easier to work with. Now I'm just going to go here, select the table itself, and let's make it easier immediately. 1px, there's border of course, 1px solid, and then let's go back. Take a look at that. Now we know this is inside of a table. We can use th to also select table headers. So this will select both tables and table headers. So now they're also selected. And if we were to add the td, so now it's selecting the table headers and the td, and it looks like this. So now it's already 10 times easier to understand. Now for those of you who don't quite understand this part, basically what's happening is we're doing this. This one can just be td, this one can just be th, and this one can just be table. That's what we did, we just did it in one line. So by doing that, we don't need to put 3 there, we just have to put 1 here. Anyhow, let's just go back to selecting the table. Another thing you can also do is set the width, and I'm just going to go here and say table th and td, and border 1px solid black. Okay, so now we're back to where we were. Now with this table here, I'm just going to say width 100%. And now the table looks 20 times better. Now we have our name with our names here, job with our jobs, and the pay with our pay. Now something you can also take note of is if we were to take away one of these columns here, like this, you'll actually notice one is a little bit longer than the other. I believe this is dependent on which has the longest things here. So if we were to make this mic a little bit longer, you'll notice this takes up more space than job. So this spacing here is determined by the length of the text in here. That's actually more HTML rather than CSS, but just something you might want to take note of. Now you might notice all these double borders here. Some may not like it. I think it looks pretty cool, but you could also go border collapse, and then you just specify collapse. And it will collapse the borders onto each other, so it looks like one singular border. Some will like this more than others. Now since we can mess with the width here, we can also mess with the height. So let's say we select th. If we select th, we can say height is equal to, let's say, 50 pixels. And now the height will be nice and big. So we're selecting the table header and just resizing the height here. You can also do some alignment, because as you can see, the jack here is kind of there at the left, same with coding and pay. It's pretty simple if we just go td here. So select the table data, which is usually inside of the rows. And we say text align center. And I will align the text to the center, or if you wanted to the right. Now you can also make this look a little bit better. But instead of just giving all of them a border, we're instead selecting just th and td here, and setting the border bottom. And it really looks pretty cool, but if you want to make it look a little bit more like the bootstrap version, you could go here and just change the coloring to something a bit lighter, and now it would look really futuristic. And of course you could as well put some padding here, so padding 10 pixels to make it look cooler. That might be a little bit big, but yeah, you get what I'm saying. And since we now know how to use hover, if we were to go tr:hover, then we can go background color, and we can make it the same as the one here. So we hover over it, it will be easy to read. We can even say, once we hover over it, our pointer, or our cursor, not our pointer, our cursor should be a pointer. So now our cursor will point when we hover over it. And as we know with the pseudo classes, we can also go, and let's just remove this cursor, and yeah, so we can just go tr nth children or child even. So what this is saying, on every even value here. So every even row, what we want to do is we want to change the background color of that one to, and let's choose something AAA. There we go. And of course, if we were to just move this here, then now the hovering will also work. So for every second child starting at the first one, or starting at the second one, because remember this is also a table row. Take a look here, table row. So every even child, so 1, 2 is an even number, so row 2 will have that color. 3 is not an even number, it will not have that color. And then finally 4 is an even number, so it will have that color. And then we can maybe make the top here background color, and let's maybe make it aquamarine. And now the top here will be a nice aquamarine color. Now let's say we had a ton of rows. So I'm just going to decrease the number of rows here, or more columns. So let's say pay, and we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we added 12. So now we have a lot. And just so we know where the end is, I'm going to say 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. And here I'm going to go lol. So you'll notice the end is all the way here, which is pretty far. So what we could do is we could go here to, you'll notice this margin div we have around the table. And we can go hashtag margin, that is a class, right? ID, yep it is. And we say overflow x auto. And now that scrolling is contained to this specific table. So if we were to remove this, we have to scroll the page, which is not ideal. But by just adding this one line, and I see a lot of older websites didn't add this line, but by just adding this one line, the page doesn't scroll left to right, but just the table. Something very important, and I still see some websites even today don't implement this. We can start with an unordered list, which has about 5 ally tags. So here we have a nice little list. We can just go and select that list, so ally, that list item, and say display none. This will hide this away. So we go here and we inspect the page, and we go to body. We go here to this div here, UL. So you'll notice we still have these ally tags, but we cannot see them. So none will just hide the elements, so it looks like there's no element there. We also have inline, which will list the elements or sort them in a single line. Inline allows you to make things horizontal. So it can convert vertical things for you into horizontal things. Usually good for if you have like these menus here at the top, these navigation bars. Block will of course make something take a whole block. As an example, to make it more easy to see, if we have a p tag here, I am cool span, but you are not. Let's say we do that. You don't see any difference here, but let's select this span. Then you'll notice the span takes up an entire block for itself here. So that is what block does. If we just say inline here, then no problem at all. But let's say we say display inline, and we say width 100 pixels. That's strange. Okay, I can't set the width. That's very strange actually. How do I set the width? Well, instead of using inline, you can use inline block. Since a block allows you to have an entire block scope for yourself, inline removes that block scope and it just puts everything on the same line. Inline block will kind of find a nice spot between the two. It won't take its own block, but will still give it a block scope element, so you can still add things like width and height to it. Whilst with inline, you cannot add these styling to it. It is stuck where it is. With inline block, you can add block styling to it. Now, position property allows you to specify the type of positioning you want to apply to a specific element, such as static, relative, fixed, absolute, and sticky. You can then use these positionings to position an element from the top, the right, the left, and the bottom. Let's start with static. Static positioned elements are not affected by the top, bottom, left, and right properties in your CSS. So to give an example of this, let's say we have a bunch of lorem. Just a p tag, lorem, and let's say times 10. How much space does that take? Okay, that's good enough. And then here we have a p tag with the class or with the ID of test, and this just says I am sticky. And we put another p tag here of lorem of times 10. There we go. Okay, so here we have the I am sticky, and there we go. And we might want to add some more lorem here. Lorem times 2. There we go. Nice, and a lot of lorem. Okay. Then here we select the element that has the ID of test. Go here, hashtag test, and we just say position sticky. Now take a look what happens when we scroll. Not sticky, I meant to say static. My bad. There we go. Nothing really happens. It just stays kind of where it is. By default, things will be positioned as static. If we were to say right, and we were to say 200 pixels, nothing will happen. If we were to say top, 200 pixels, nothing will happen. So static is what everything is by default here. Just static content on the page. It doesn't move. It doesn't do anything. Then we have relative. An element with the position of relative is positioned relative to its usual position where it would be. For example, if we were to make this relative, then let's just make it less than 200. Let's just make it 20 pixels. And I'm just going to make this left so it's easier. There we go. So now it's 20 pixels down and 20 pixels from the top, or from the left and from the top, from where it usually was. So if we were to remove this, this is where it was originally. We then moved it relative from where it was to a new position. So that's what relative does. Then we have fixed, and fixed is a fixed position on this part of the page, the part that you can see. So if we just go here and say background color red, there we go. Then this will always be there, no matter where I scroll, no matter where I am. This is fixed, so it will be here forever. It is similar, but not the same as absolute. So if we say absolute, 20 pixels, you will not see a difference. But the difference is, when I scroll down, it doesn't scroll with me. Absolute is from here on the page, depending on exactly what you do. There are states or times when this is not the case. But absolute starts from here on the page at 20 pixels, and it doesn't move. It's absolute positioned. Fixed will always be in the view of the user. That is what fixed is. So fixed is always fixed to where the user is looking. Now you need to take note, if we go back here to absolute, since we scroll down like this, we don't like that really. What we could do to make sure that this is maybe, because you don't want to position something like this. You don't want to do that just to get it where you want it to be. That is usually not the way to go. Generally, you should stay away from absolute positioning as much as possible, because a lot of beginners specifically make the mistake of positioning everything absolute, and then when there comes a time or point where they need to add another button or add something to the styling, it breaks everything. And when the screen size changes, everything breaks again. Absolute, you should almost always stay away from it unless you know what you're doing. Now to make an absolute positioning, not start positioning from the top here, because the page might change depending on where you are. What we could do is we could wrap this p tag, and I'm just going to call this, let's use a class for once, rel, just for relative. We move this here. Then what we do is we select this rel, and here I'm just again going to do 20 pixels so it doesn't go too far off, and we go hashtag rel position relative. And this should be a dot, not a hashtag. And since it's a class, and now you'll notice, even though it's only 20 pixels, it's here. The reason for that is when you position something absolute in a relative positioned element, so if its parent element is positioned relative, then your absolute will be positioned absolute relative to this position. So it will start from here. Not from here, but from here, where this rel is relatively positioned, because it is covering this element that is absolute. But this is specifically with relative. If we say static, it's not going to work. If we say fixed, it's not going to work. It's specifically relative, in which case you can allow absolute a little bit of extra creativity without needing to use this specific point on the page. And then finally, we have sticky. Position sticky. Now the thing with sticky is, it is almost a middle ground between relative and fixed. It almost switches between them for you. And let's just position maybe the top here to 0. And let's maybe move this ID and change it to rel here instead. Dot rel. There we go. And instead of using a p tag, we're going to use a div here. And now you'll notice it swaps between relative and fixed. So if we were to make this 20 pixels, then now it will stay 20 pixels from the top, but once we scroll above it, it's going to stay there. Once we go below it, or should be going below it, it will stay where it is. That's the nice part of sticky. Take note, it doesn't really work with p tags, so you need to use a div here. And those are the different types of positioning you can get. And of course, you don't need to use top left. You can go bottom as an example. So bottom 20 pixels. So now it's a little bit more weird, but now if you scroll up, it will always be at the bottom until we go there, and then it's normal. Now the float property specifies how an element should float on a website. As an example, we can make an element, instead of sitting here on the left, make it sit there on the right via floating. As an example, let's just remove all of this. Let's create a p tag, put some lorem in here. Lorem times 2. There we go. So now we have a nice little bit of text. Then next to this p tag, I want to have an image that just contains this image.jpg here. So we just go here, image.jpg. We're not going to worry too much about the alt tag. There we go. Now this image, I'm just going to give in, I'm not even going to give it a class or anything. I'm just going to go here, select image, and we can make the width about 50 pixels. Then maybe a little too small, 300 pixels. A little bit too big, definitely 200 pixels is the way to go. There, almost basically where we need it. So now that we have this image, all we need to do, and we should just make sure our image is inside of this p tag, so it knows what to float against. And if you save this, then you'll see nothing happens. But if we go here and say float, and we go right, then we'll float here on the right. Now let's move this image to before the text starts. And now you'll notice this image is floating here to the right, and the text goes to the next line before it touches this image. This is the power of float in CSS. We can do the same here by making it go to the left here by just saying float left. And now we'll do the same. The image will be here and the text will be here. And of course, if you wanted to, you could say float none. And then it will start here at the end of the image. That is very much the basics of float. There's of course a lot more you can do with float depending on what you want to achieve. Some people wouldn't even worry too much about this. Let's say you just want two images next to each other. Then you could simply do this. And I'm just going to give this one an ID of 1 and this one an ID of 2. Then here we go. Images, that's perfectly fine. And then hashtag 1 float right. And now we have one image here and one image here. If we wanted to, we could go 2 and say float left. So now they will always float. And let's add a p tag with some lorem. And of course we should add these images inside of this p tag for the best effect. And now, because these two are floating, the text starts after this image and ends before this image. So let's say we have this little piece of text here. And one of the things you often hear web developers or designers complaining about is how difficult it is to center a div, to make this div in the center. Now, if you want to go old school, you could use the center HTML tag, which I didn't think is really supported or being supported anymore. I think it's deprecated. But you could use the center tag and I will center it for you, but that's HTML. If we're talking about CSS, then let's say we select this div, hashtag margin, and let's go border 1px solid black, padding 1 rem. Okay, so here we go. And let's make sure the width, just so we can see it, is 300 pixels. Let's make it 200. There we go. Now to center this div, what we can do is say margin auto. And that will automatically add margining to the left and to the right to center this div in the middle of the screen for us. And as easy as that, we have just centered a div. Let's say we want to center the text inside of this div. Then we can use text align center, and that will also center the text inside of this div, but it will not center the div itself, only the text. Now the same can be applied to images. So if we were to go here and say image, and here have an image.jpg, so image.jpg, save that, just go image, make the width 200 pixels. If we go display block, margin auto, then this image will also be centered on the screen. Cool. Now let's talk about, I'm just going to remove this and let's use this image as an example. Let's talk about positioning with alignment. So let's say we have let's go here, position and absolute. So we know what this does. Absolute. This makes sure that our image starts from here 0, 0, but we can use things such as top and go 20 pixels, and I will position it 20 pixels from the top. We'll do the same with left, right, top and bottom. You have all of these options you can change here to make this be at the perfect position for you. So that will align it to wherever you need it. So let's say top 60 pixels. And then right, so from this side, 20 pixels. And now will be positioned the top right. You can also use a float for positioning. So we can just say float right. And I will be floating on the right of the screen. I want to show you something. Let's move this here. And in this here. Now this margin here, I would like to just go here. Move this image to before p tag, so it's right there, and then go margin border 1 px solid black. You'll notice the border doesn't include the image. This is the flaw of using float. We can fix this by simply going margin after, and we already know what this does. So margin after, so after this has been added, we make the content nothing will happen. We say clear both, and this clears floating elements, so floating styles. And in display table. And now this here will include the image as well. So this is the clear fix hack when an element is taller than the containing div. Because generally a div should auto size to the size it needs to be, but sometimes it fails, especially when you use things like float. Now let's quickly take a look at maybe centering this div here. So we just have this div, and this div is just 100 pixels. Now let's say we want to center it in the middle of the page. So we can say position absolute, then top 50%, bottom 50%. Then when we do this, and not bottom, I meant to say left. There we go. Then when we do this, we will see this. It is almost in the center, but not quite. Now, this is because this part here is the starting point of this div. So what we need to do is we need to take this starting point and make it the center of this div. To do that, we can use transform, translate, and we will also get deeper into what transform and translate does in a future tutorial. But by going -50% and in -50%, it is nicely centered. What is happening is this is the X. We take 50% of the width of this and we subtract it from the X axis, or from the X here, from the left. And that will make that this moves 50% closer, making it in the center of the middle. And in this does the same, but for the Y axis. So here I have an image, and we can just resize it to be 300 pixels. Now simply to change the opacity of this image, we can just use opacity. When it's 1, it's its default. And you can use 0. whatever to make it go lower. So 0.6 will make it a little bit more see-through. If we go 0.1, it will be very see-through. And when we go 0, it's basically invisible. You can make very nice effects with this by going like something like this, and it's saying image, hover, opacity 1. So we hover over it and it changes the opacity. Very nice effect. Now this also works with things like divs. So if this was a div, we can actually move this up from image to div. So then it will be scaled to the div. And this can of course just still be for an image. So image, there we go. Then even in this div, if we go and put some lorem here and a p tag, then this here will also be a little bit faded, as you can see when I hover over it. So you can use the opacity with divs as well, and it will change the opacity of everything inside of it. You can also use, instead of opacity, I'm just going to remove this hover here, you could use background, and you can set RGBA for red, green, blue, alpha. And let's just go 255, 255, 255, 1. This is what you'd expect. But by changing the alpha channel to, let's say, 0.3, you change the opacity. But take note, you don't change the opacity of the content inside of this div. You change the opacity of the color this div is in. So if I were to remove this and go 0, you'll notice there's a purplish color, but when I go 1, then it's a very, very visible purple. With 0.3, it's not so visible, but you can still see it. So this here will also do opacity-like things, but not for the content inside of this div, only for the background color. ID, and we can say para for ID paragraph. You have a class para as well, and yeah. Now here we can go hashtag para to select ID, set the color of it to red. Now it's red. Now we select the class, so class para, and we set the color of it to blue. But you'll notice what is happening here. Even though my color is being set here, even after this one, it is still red. What if we swap them? it will still be red because this ID takes priority in this case. And that means that our class cannot overwrite this unless we use important. So exclamation mark important. This means overwrite all of the previous styling for this specific property on this element. So this color styling will be overwritten everywhere for this specific property on this specific class. This is very handy if you have styling that is conflicting with each other and you really need to just bring new styling in without needing to mess around too much. Then you can quickly use important to say, hey, this styling is important and this is what we should be doing. And if we were to move this ID here to underneath this class, then it will still show blue. So important will force, in a sense, this styling onto this element. And the only way to overwrite an important is to add another important. That's the only way you can overwrite it. Generally, it is a good idea to try and avoid important as much as possible, due to the fact that it can cause more issues than it solves in the long run. But that's about it. Important just overwrites the styling of this. So let's say you have two clashing stylings. Important will overwrite and it will apply this styling to it. So even if I go here and say P color black, you won't see anything happen. If I do this, it will be red. If I do this, it will be black. So we have three types of gradients we are going to talk about. The linear gradient, radial gradient, and conic gradient. However, I might have butchered how you pronounce that, but it's probably conic. Now a linear gradient goes up, down, left, or right, or diagonally. So it goes from one point to the other. A radial gradient is defined by its circle, or its center, so it is like a circle. A conic gradient is rotated around a center point, which sounds complex, but it is not. Let's get to the CSS linear gradient. Then here we have the margined div, and we can just go hashtag margined. And to create a gradient, we can use the background image property. Then we can specify linear gradient. And in the direction you want it to go in, so let's say right, so it will then go from right to left. Then the first color, let's say red, and in the second color, let's say blue. If we save that, and let's just make sure, and that should be a comma. If we save that, and my bad, this should not be right, it should be to right, telling it should go from left to right. And there we go. So it starts at red and it goes to blue. We can of course add more, such as pink, and now it will go red, blue, pink, and so on. And you can of course say to left, or you don't need to specify the direction at all, and it will just go from top to bottom by default. Or if you wanted to go diagonally, we can say to bottom right, or to bottom left, or to top right, or to bottom, or to top left. And you can make it go diagonally, as such. You can also use angles if you do not like this, if you need more power over it. You can also say something like 90 deg for a 90 degrees, and as basically to right. Or we can go 120 degrees, and now it'll be at a slight angle, or 150, but more of an angle there, or 180, and that's from top to bottom. You can also add transparency to these colors. As an example, we can go RGBA, and we can say 255, 0, 0, and 1, meaning it is pure red and it is not transparent. And if we do that again, but this time say 0, it is pure red but also transparent. Now it goes from red to transparent background. Let's say you only want them to go for a certain amount of percentage of this whole block. Just to make it easier, I'm going to turn this back to 90 degrees so we can see from here to there. And I'm going to make this blue. Then let's say we also add pink here. Now here with blue we could say 10%, and here with pink we can say 30%. If we save this, we'll see red take up a small space, then it's blue, and then pink gets this whole big space, basically gets the rest of what is left. It basically, blue starts at 10%, pink starts at 30%. If we were to make this 50, blue will stay at the same place, but pink will start at the halfway mark. If you want them to repeat, you could also go and say, instead of linear gradient, you could say repeating linear gradient. And now it will repeat every time. So let's just make this maybe 10% as well. And as you can see, now it repeats. And maybe not 10%, let's make it 20 so we can actually see the pink. So that's how you can make it repeat over and over. So that is it on linear gradients. Next up we can talk about radial gradients. So we can just replace that with radial. And let's just remove all of that. Then first we have the shape size at its position, which can also be like its shape, or it can be ignored like previously. So we can just go red if we wanted to, and blue, and then it will also be ignored. As you'll see, it has like a circle layout and it just keeps growing. And of course you can add more again. We can say pink, and there we go. You can also specify how much or when something should stop. So we can say red is only 10% and a blue is only 15%. And as you can see, there we go. As I said, we can specify a shape such as circle, and now it's a pure circle in the center. Or we could specify where it should start. So here we could say closest side at 60%, and this should be closest. And in here it will be to the closest side at 60%. Or we could also go 55%, add another one, and this will bring it down. So first one will be x-axis, second one will be y-axis. So we go here and make this 90, you'll notice it goes down a lot more. And again, this one can also repeat, so we say repeating radial gradient, and let's just remove this pink here. Then you'll notice it repeats, and that actually looks really epic, I'm not gonna lie. But if we were to just remove this here, then you'll notice that actually looks pretty cool as well. And let's maybe add a little green. And not as cool as the first one, but it still looks pretty cool. So that is that on radial gradients. Very simple, and they're not really complex, but it can give a nice look to your website if you know what you're doing. Next, let's talk about conic gradients. Now, I do not really know how to explain this. I would say almost like a triangle, wannabe circle, square filler, something like that. But that is very confusing, so let me just show you what it does. So let's go here and say conic. And let me just remove the text for once. The text is a lot. And let's just go here and say 500 pixels by 500 pixels. There we go. That should be good. And in here, let's just add 3 colors. We don't need to specify anything else yet, just 3 regular colors. Save that. And that's very big. There we go. So here you'll notice it starts with green and it goes in a circle all the way until the end. Very confusing, but it's actually a great way if you want to make a loader. You just hide the center part here, you round it a little bit, and you make it turn. That could be a cool loader with a bunch of different colors. You can of course specify more colors if you want. Pink, purple, and there you go. Now you have a cooler effect. You can also specify how much something should be allowed. So let's go and say 50% here. And now green will take up to 50% of the space and then it will start transitioning. Or you could specify degrees, since it in a sense goes in a circular direction. You could specify 90 degrees. And now green will only go 90 degrees and then it will start transitioning to the next color. And you can of course specify this for all of them. So here we could say purple is 300 degrees. Let's do that. And now purple will start at 300 degrees and finish the loop. Now, as I said, you can make this a loader. We could just go border radius 50%. And now it's a circle. So this could also be a nice pie chart if you want, where you just specify everything from point A to point B. And just specify all of the degrees that it should start and end at. So here we could say green starts at 0 degrees, red starts at 90 degrees, blue starts at 100 degrees, pink at 180 degrees, and purple. But you should also specify where it should end. So in this case, when we do this, we do not specify where these colors end. So they just kind of fade in, which doesn't really make a good pie chart. So now we copy green and we go here and say 90 degrees, 90 deg. When we do that, you'll notice green is a much sharper cut off than what it was. And again, we do this here and we specify it where blue ends, which would be 100 degrees. Now red is also a little bit more defined. We copy that again. And now we specify 180. And then here we copy that. We specify 300. And there we go. So now we have a working pie chart, which is pretty neat. If you zoom out, it looks a bit better, but yeah. Or if you put a little clear box here in the middle. So let's just do this. So you can just go inner, and then we just go dot inner. Width is 480 pixels. And we can say the same for height. Border radius is 50% and background color is white. Now if you should of course just go transform, translate, -50%, -50%, and here we just say position, relative, and here we go position, absolute, and then left 50% and top 50%. There we go. So now we have a nice loader. If you make this background spin, which you could probably do with a little bit of JavaScript, or if you are proficient enough in CSS, you can make it with CSS as well. Then you can have a little loader for yourself. Cool. Let's remove inner here. And we can remove that. Now if you want to specify where it should start, so it always starts here from the top, but you could specify where it should start by going here to the front and saying from, and let's say 180 degrees. Then it will start here instead of here. You could also specify where the center positioning should be. So by default it is in the middle of this div. But you could say at 60%, and then at 20, and then at 20% right there. So then it is 20% on the y-axis, so it's first x-axis, then y-axis, and 60% on the x-axis, always starting from the left. So now the center point is here and not in the middle. And again, you could have this repeat by just adding repeating, of course, and then removing all of the extra bloat, because that is a little bit too much for me. I'll just do that, and do that, and specify 10% and 15%. There we go, so now it repeats. Alright, so that's the basics of the 3 gradient types we have been talking about. As you can see, they're not very difficult. I'm just going to, this is like hypnotizing, so I'm just going to remove that. So they're pretty cool, and you can do a lot of really interesting effects with them if you practice with them and have a little bit of fun. Now, transition in CSS is like the very basics of creating animations in CSS. So let's create a button. Here we have a button with the class of btn, or actually it doesn't even need a class. Now I'm just going to go here and select the button. So here we have a button. Now the first thing you need to know about a transition is everything needs a set value once you start. So here you could specify width of, let's say, 100 pixels and a height of maybe 50 pixels. So here we have a button. We gave it a set width and height. And let's give it a background color of aqua. Now to give it a transition, we say transition. We can specify what we want to change. So let's say the width and how long it should take. 2 seconds as an example. Then here we can say button hover. So when someone hovers over the button, change the width to 50 pixels as well. Now if we hover over it, it will shrink the button to be the same size or as the height. Go like that, it will go back. So every time you hover over it, it will animate its way into what you want. Now something you should remember is if we were to add a height here, you'll notice the height itself doesn't transition. That is why we specify width here, meaning only that property will actually have a transition added to it. This is if you want a couple of things to change once you hover over it. For example, you want the pointer or the cursor to be a pointer, but you don't want that to transition, you only want the width to transition. So in that case, only that one value or that one attribute will transition. If you want multiple, you could do something like height, and let's make 1 second. So now both of those will transition. Now you can also change the speed curve of the transition, such as it goes fast when it starts but slows down at the end, or vice versa. As an example here, we can add transition timing function, and we could do linear. Now you'll notice that it has the same speed from start to finish. Unlike ease is what we used to use, we'll notice the height goes a little bit faster and feels a little bit more uneven. So basically ease, which is the default, will have a slow start, then it will go fast and it will slowly end again. Where linear will have the same speed from the start to the end. So linear, let's have a look at that again. The same speed, it doesn't speed up and it doesn't slow down. If you only wanted to have a slow start, you can have an ease in. Now it will only have a slow start, but it will get faster. Or if you only wanted to have a slow end, you can say ease out. Now it will start faster, but slowly end. And you can also have ease in out, which will have a slow in and out, almost the same as ease. Now if you hover over this, you'll actually notice, or not hover over it, but if you go like that, you'll notice equivalent to cubic Bezier. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. And here it specifies the value that is stored inside of this ease in out. Now cubic Bezier is so you can personally specify exactly how you want it. So here we could go cubic Bezier, and let's say we specify 1, 0.1, and then 1 again. Now if we take a look at it, it will have its own little function or own little transition. If you want to know more about cubic Bezier, because if I go into it, it will be a rather lengthy topic, you can go to the MDN reference. Let's open that up. And in here you can learn more about this transition timing effects, as here you can see how the Bezier function works. So you can see here, it has a weird transition thanks to this cubic Bezier. And here it will explain to you how all of this works, the syntax, what values you can put in, and so on. So if you want to know more about it, then it's as simple as just going to the documentation. Now you can delay when a transition should happen by using transition delay. And let's say 1 second. Now the transition will be delayed 1 second before happening. If I go off, it will take 1 second and then it will go back. Now another thing you can do is this transition here is basically a shorthand property for most of the transition properties. As an example, we can remove this just so we can keep it basic, and we can split this into transition property with. Now we can remove this. But this on its own, not really something you do. You can use transition duration to s. There we go. Now the width will change. So all of that we basically squeezed into one big transition. As an example, if we go here and say transition, we could specify the width at 2 seconds, and here we can specify what type. So let's just go linear, and you can specify the delay 1 second. Then we can remove all of this except for the background color, of course, and there we go. So you can either have it all inside of one transition property, or you can split this up into transition property, transition duration, transition timing function, and transition delay. It's up to you which one you prefer. If you do this, transition 2 seconds linear 1 second, then everything will be transitioned. So if you don't want something specific to transition, you're going to just remove the property itself. And then you don't have to worry about just one thing if you want everything to transition. So there you go. So there's a lot you can do here to make your transitions awesome. Later on we'll be getting into animations like building your own, which will use keyframes. But for now, this is a good starting point for creating simple animations or transitions to make your website a little bit more friendlier to the consumer, instead of everything just happening immediately. So here, let me just go and select both of these and make sure their background color is red. Their width is 500 pixels and their height is 500 pixels. 500 maybe a little bit much. Let's go 100. There we go. Then I select hashtag margin, and let's actually change its background color also to red, but let's go RGBA, and let's go 0.5. There we go. And in the inner can have a background color of red. Now let's take a look at the transform property. So we'll first start by just looking at translate. So transform translate. And here, let's say 50 pixels and 50 pixels. Now you'll notice this is where it started. So this is the div it is inside of. And it has moved 50 pixels downwards and 50 pixels left or right. So now it is here. So what translate does, it is basically moves your object to a specific location. So if we were to go here and say position, absolute, left 50%, top 50%, you'll notice it's not quite in the center. This part of it is in the center, but the rest of it is not in the center. We can go transform, translate, and we can specify negative 50%. And note that everything inside translate is relative to the component, to the element, and not to the page. So when we say this, we are basically saying, take 50% of this square and move it to the left. Then take the other 50% of the square on the bottom, so here, and move that up. So when we hide this, you'll notice this part is in the center, but when we do this, we basically make the center this part here, in a sense, so the very center of the square. That is how this translate works. Relative to the object, it will move it. So here we could have gone negative 50 pixels and negative 50 pixels instead. Negative, of course. and we would have gotten the same effect. The reason we said percentage here is because if we were to ever change this to, let's say, 200 pixels, then it will no longer be accurate, because now this needs to be boosted to 100 pixels. Because we need to move it 100 pixels to the left and 100 pixels to the top. So that's what this translate does. It basically takes an existing element. We can then tell that element to move more to a specific location depending on how we want it. When we use percentage, like 50% and 50%, this means add 50% or move 50% of this element's width and height to the respective locations. So now it will be even further there. Translate is somewhat difficult to wrap your head around, but it's actually very, very simple. Because we have to open up our drawing application. Let's say this is our square, right? Now, our starting point or our center, when we use that absolute positioning, would be here. But when we use translate negative 50%, that means, okay, take this. So let's just go translate. Imagine that T is for translate, negative 50%. We're saying take this width right here and move it here. That's what we're saying. So take 50% of the width of this element and move it to the left. If we're to not have this subtract here, it will move it to the right. And of course, if we have another negative 50%, then that will mean, and take this here and move it to the top. So we'll take 50% of the height of the y-axis of this element and move it upwards. If there was no negative, it will move it downwards. So that's basically what translate does. It's very simple, but it might be difficult to wrap your head around it. Next, we have rotate. So transform, and let's make sure everything's back where it was. There we go. And then rotate, and here we can say 20 degrees. Now, as you can see, it rotates it by 20 degrees. We can maybe just go here and say margin free rem. There we go. So rotate is pretty simple. It will just rotate it the amount of degrees you want it to rotate. And you can, of course, rotate to the other direction. So negative 50 degrees instead of 50 degrees. You can also scale it, meaning it scales to go bigger or smaller. So scale. Now this here will scale it times the amount you put in here. So 1, 1, meaning don't scale. You'll basically stay the same. If we say 2, it scales it 2 times the width. If we say 2 here, it will scale it 2 times the height. So it basically increases the size times the amount you want it. So in this case, it will go from 100 pixels to 200 pixels, 200 pixels. And we can prove that by going here and changing these to 2, and you won't see a difference other than the fact that it's just being repositioned. To make it grow smaller, you can use 0, so 0.5. That'll make it half its original size. So as you can see here, now it's only half the size, 0.1. Now it's only 10% its original size. You can do the same by just using specific ones such as scale X. That will only scale the X axis. So we go 2, as you can see. And you can of course use scale Y to only scale the Y axis. If you just use scale, you can scale both the X and the Y axis. Now you can also use skew X, and it will make it skew along the X axis at a given angle, so 20 degrees. And you'll notice on the X axis it goes a little bit weird, so it skews to the sides. You also do skew Y for the same effect, and you can use a skew as such to skew both ends or both sides. Next up, let's talk about 3D transformations. So let's, as an example, go here and say transform rotate, and let's go rotate X by 20 degrees. And there's by 20 degrees. Very simple. This is a 2D rotation. For a 3D rotation, you specify the axis, so rotate X, would be, and let's go 150 degrees. Now it rotated 150 degrees on the X axis. In this case, we can't quite see it. Now a way for us to see this is if we were to go here and go P, I am cool, you'll see it's actually flipped upside down. If we were to actually make this a little bit smaller, you'll actually notice it does quite a couple of things. So now it's starting to flip back around. Now this might be a little bit confusing, but we have to take it in a sense of these are our axes. So we have our X axis, our Y axis, and our Z axis. Now when we say make our X 150, we're saying basically move this up like that. So our square basically goes like this. Then we were to take a side angle, so this is how our square would look from a side, right? Or if we were to make it a square like this, so this could also be from the side, it's just two-dimensional, or one-dimensional, and this is two-dimensional. Anyhow, then if we skew it, basically what's happening is it goes like this, this, and then finally get to this point where it looks like that. That's what's happening. This is our 150 degree angle. So 150, that's 150 degrees afterwards. Basically, it has become upside down. Here, the same will happen. Now, I don't know how to draw this, but it should look something like this or something. I have no idea. I can't draw that well. Basically, it will be maybe like this. And here it would be like this. So this is where the original top was. Then here, that will look next. And this is where the original top was. And then finally here at the bottom, it would be upside down. Hopefully this helped, where I gave you a one-dimensional and a two-dimensional representation of how from the side view, of course, of how it flips. So this is the front view. So we'll go F, and both of these are the side views. Side. So that is how it flips on the X axis in 3D. It's very confusing, but it's not as confusing once you think about it a little bit. You can do the same with Y. So we can go rotate Y. And now here we could go 150 degrees to flip it as well. And now it is basically flipped. 100 degrees, 50 degrees, and so on. Basically it's doing the same thing, but flipping in the other direction. So here, if we were to take a side view, so this is from the side, then of course, now showing the y-axis from side view is a little bit more difficult for me to do, but or the one-dimensional, so I'll go with the two-dimensional one. So now, it will look like this. There we go. So now basically, it has tilted a little bit, just enough for us basically to see this part behind it. It's very confusing for me to draw the Y, as I can't quite visualize it as easily as the X, but basically it does the same as the X, but instead of flipping like this, it instead flips like this. So this is the Y, and this is the X. X flips up to down, Y flips right to left. Or other way around, not really sure, one of the two. Anyhow. So that is how the Y works. But then you also have the Z axis. So let's go here and say Z. And now it flips completely on its head. So now it's flipped like that. So basically Z flips the square completely from the front view. So Z flips from the front view. So when you flip Z, it basically goes like that. It flips it like that. Z is a little bit easier to see and understand. So we go 45. Generally, when we flip it in 2D, so we say rotate 45 degrees, it will stay the same. Because in two-dimensional space, we are currently flipping it at the Z axis in CSS by default. So when you say rotate Z, you don't see a difference if you change that. Now you can add all of these together by saying rotate 3D. And we can choose a value between 0 and 1. And in the angle, like 45 degrees, that you want it to rotate at. When we go 0, and all of them except for the first one, which is X, Y, Z, X will only rotate 45 degrees. If we go 150, you'll see it is flipped. If we go 170, it's basically perfectly fit. And if we do the same with Y, then now we flip like that. And if we do the same with Z, then we flip like that. Now this is actually pretty cool because if we mix inner, hover, redo that, is that not pretty cool? Now if we say transition, duration, 1 second. Now I have a 3D way of seeing what's happening. So this is actually a great way to show you what has been happening. So let's go here and say rotate X 170 degrees. So this is what I've been showing you from the side view where it flips all the way until it's upside down. And in the one I was struggling to visualize to you, Y, as you can see, as cool as that. And of course Z, and then once you add them all together, you get this, where you can transform it into three-dimensional space into what you want. Now you of course have more 3D values you can use. You can use translate X, Y, Z, or translate 3D to use all of them together. You have scale X, Y, Z, or scale 3D to scale them all together. Currently, when we wanted to get to an animation, we used to use transition. But the thing with transition is it is a very easy way to implement a type of animation. But just as it is very easy, it is also a little simple. This is where keyframes comes into play. For example, let's start simple. Let's just have this here. Now, if we wanted to, we could animate this background color just to get an example of how this differs from a transition. First, we need to provide an animation name. So what animation will execute when we want this animation to run? So animation name. And the animation name for this case can just be change color. And you can also specify the duration the animation will play at. And we can just say animation duration. And here we could say 2 seconds should be more than enough. So here we have animation, but we haven't actually defined this animation. So above this block here, we can say at keyframes, then the identifier would be the name of this animation, which is change color. And in here we can specify where the animation should go. Then we'll start basic and just use from, which says where do we start, and then to, which says where do we end. So we start from red. So let me just go here and we can remove this background, or actually let's just go here. We say red. Now we start from background color of red, and we want to end in background color of green. Now when we save this, you'll notice over 2 seconds, it does that animation and then it resets it. Let's make it a little bit longer so we can see it better. So 4 seconds. And you'll notice now it goes all the way to green. Once it reaches the end of the animation, it goes back to its original state. That is because an animation only runs and then it resets to what it originally was. Unlike a transition, it won't just automatically go back to where it was. You'll need to manually set that. So in this case, it won't transition or animate back to its original color. It will just go back to red immediately. Now, usually you would not be using from and to. This is just if you have a really basic animation that has really basic things you need to do. But most of the time, you'll use percentages, such as 0%. This could be 100%. And the idea behind this is, so this is also to from, but the idea behind this is you can have multiple in here. So we could go like this. So 25, 50, and let's also add a 75. Why not? 75. And you can have as many of these as you want. But the idea is that now you have animation states or steps. So here we could say, instead of red, we could say pink, blue, green, and then we can softly transition it back to red. Now it goes red, pink, blue, green, and it's back to red. So here you can say at what state or stage this should be. And of course, the longer you make this duration, so let's say 10 seconds, the longer this will be, but it will still reach every state here. Now, of course, it isn't limited to something like a color. You can, of course, make it change in size. For example, we could go width, and what is the current width? The current width, 100 pixels. Let's say it starts at 100 pixels. And if you wanted to, you don't even need to specify it starts there, but I'm going to do that. At 50%, it will be 200 pixels, and then at 100%, we want it back at 100 pixels. And now you'll notice the width also changes as everything else changes. And again, you're not limited to this. You can also do positioning. So where should it be on the screen? Left, top, right, bottom, whatnot. The possibilities is endless. You can put any type of CSS styling in here to change it. Now you can also delay an animation. So let's make it 5 seconds, so it's a little shorter, but you can also add an animation delay. And let's say we delay it for 2 seconds. Now when the page refreshes, it will wait 2 seconds before it starts running the animation. If you want to skip forward in an animation, you could use negative. So -2 will mean it will skip forward immediately to after about 2 seconds. So it will do the opposite of delay it, it will skip forward. So we set 1 second, then we'll get this. You can also specify how many times an animation should run. For example, animation iteration count. It's times like these where this IntelliSense is very useful. And infinite will of course make it run infinitely, but you could also specify a number that specifies how many times this animation should repeat itself. In this case, if it's free, it will do this 3 times and then it will stop. I should have made this duration a little shorter. As you can see, it did it 3 times, it stopped. If you were to say infinite, then it will just do it continuously forever. So 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6, and so on. It will never stop. You can also make the animation play backwards and then forwards. As an example, animation direction. And generally it's normal, but if you say reverse, it will play backwards and then forwards. And let's just make sure we understand how that looks. So we'll start it off at 120. So it will end at a little bit bigger than it starts as. So let's make 150 so it's easier. So you'll notice it starts and then it goes up to the big side and then it stops here at the end. So that will so all this will do is it just reverses the animation. Very simple. And here again, just like with the previous ones, we also have animation timing function. So this is the same as what we had with transitions, where here we also have linear, ease in, ease out, ease in, out. And basically, I already explained all of this in the previous tutorial, but to just explain it again, ease basically says start slow, go fast, end slow. Linear is be the same speed from the start to the end. Ease in means start slow. Ease out means end slow. Ease in, out means start and end slow. And you have cubic, Bezier, which is a whole mathematical function thing. You also have an animation fill mode, which has a couple of properties such as none, which is the default, and that means nothing will really be applied to this animation. You have forwards, which means the element will retain the style values that is set by the last keyframe. Meaning, if we add a styling here, so let's say 150, and we go here and say animation fill mode, then we can specify forwards. That means it will end with this value, and you'll notice there's not that jump anymore. So if we do this, you'll remember there's that jump at the end. Very weird, nobody likes that. But if we do this, it means end with the last styles provided here. So if we change the color here will also stay the same. Just like this width here. So it will stay as these last values passed in. You also have backwards, meaning finish with what you started with. So you'll get everything here. As this is the exact same things we have here, nothing will change, but it's the same idea as forward. It just now ends with the first one here, which might not always be the exact same you have here. Now, of course, all of these here is kind of a long thing to do. So what you can do instead, if you don't want multiple properties like this, is you can say animation. And here you can specify the name. So in our case, that would be change color. The duration, 2 seconds. The type, in our case, it's ease, but that's the default. So let's make it linear. The delay, so let's say 1 second. What the iteration count should be, we can say infinite. And in the animation direction, we can actually say reverse. Why not? So if we do that, then we can remove all of these, and there we go. So it will wait, then it will start, and it will continuously do this every time. And the only reason it's jumping like that is, again, because the width here, so if we made that 100, it will no longer jump like that. And that is the basics of animations and keyframes inside of CSS. It's actually very simple. You just give it new values depending on what you put here, and then it will follow that via keyframes. So here with margin, we can actually add a couple of multiple items in here just so we have an idea of what we're working with. So instead of having just one div, let's call this one inner1. Then we can have a couple more. We can call this inner2 and inner3. Actually, we can, instead of giving them IDs, we can give them classes. Class. So all of them can have the same class of inner. Now, inner, just so we can see them, we'll have a width of 100 pixels, a height of 100 pixels, a background color of gray, and there we go. And here we can just, of course, maybe make the margin, and we just make sure we can also see the margin if needed. And you can say the background color should be, like, so here we do see the margin, and here we have the divs as well. Now I'm going to give all of them a margin of 1 rem just so we can actually see these squares that we're trying to look at. So you can see here we actually have these squares. Now sometimes you would like these squares to actually be next to each other. One way you can do this is to, instead of using a div, you can use a span. However, that is with HTML, and as you can see, it has its own little flaws. So now you have to do a bunch of things to fix what you just did and add a bunch more CSS. The CSS way to fix this, which is much simpler, is to just say display flex. And this should of course be on the margin and not the inner. So it should be on the parent of the items you want next to each other. And now they will all be in this nice horizontal row. Now I have a bunch of things you can test out, such as the flex direction. So let's say you don't want it to be in a row, but you do want it to be in a column. So flex direction column. And if we were to put values in here, just so we can keep track of them. So this can be banana, car, and games. So here all of them have values. We can also do column reverse. And this will flip them. So now games will be here and banana will be on the bottom. Well, column will keep them in the original direction. Row is what it is by default when we say display flex. And if we were to say row reverse, it would of course do the opposite, or it will of course reverse him, just like we saw before, and it will have be games, then car, then banana. Now sometimes, if there isn't enough space, as in this scenario, you might want to make this wrap, so make it go to the next line. This is a great way to implement some sort of feature where mobile devices will be able to better view your website by making things go to the next line if the screen is small. So we can go flex wrap and say wrap, and that will wrap it once it gets too small. So as you can see, as the screen gets bigger, it does not wrap it, but as it gets smaller, it does wrap them. If you don't want it to ever wrap, and this is by default, you can say no wrap, and it will just squeeze them all in as much as it can. And you of course have wrap reverse. So again, it will flip it. So now games will be here, but now there will also be this open space here, which originally would have been here. And in car is here and bananas here. And you can merge these two into one command by just going flex flow, and we can say row wrap. And now we can just remove that, and it's the same concept, but just in one line. It depends on which you prefer. Again, it doesn't matter which one you specifically use. Now let's say we have this nice big page, and we want this all to be in the center. If that is the case, we can say justify content center, and that will center it into this square here, into this parent div. If you always want it to start from here, we can say flex start, and it will always start from here. Or if you want to start from the end, we can say flex end, and I will start from the end. But sometimes having the center there isn't exactly what you want. Maybe you want equal spacing between all of these. They can say space evenly, and then there will be equal spacing between each of these. The spacing might be a little different because we have margins, but without the margins, if we were to remove these, spacing would look a little bit more equal. You can also have space around, and it will add spacing before, between, and after each one of these. And then we have space between, which will maximize the amount of space that can be used here. Now if we were to make sure this one has a big height, such as 200 pixels, if we were to say align items, we can say center to center it vertically. So justify content makes it easy to center it horizontally, whilst align items vertically. And again, you could do flex start again. This will do from the top, flex end, which will do it from the bottom. And then you also have stretch. And it will try and stretch this items to fill the container, which is actually by default. So if we were to remove these, you'll notice they stretch downwards. So if we were to remove this height constraint here, then it will do this. But if we save it, then the height constraint will force it to not go like that. But by default, it is stretch. So if we were to do this and remove stretch, you'll notice it stays the same. If we were to do flex start, then as you'll notice, it's not the same as if we were to remove this here, because this is stretch. We also have baseline. And again, this is if we don't have like this height constraint here. So if we were to go here and let's maybe give, and this is resize this a little bit, let's maybe give this one here a special font size of font size or style, font size. And let's do the same for this one. And we'll make this one 0.5 rem. By default, it is 1 rem. So if we do this, you'll notice that these are almost in the center of each other. By using baseline, this will align the items by the text baseline. So right here at the bottom, you'll notice car also starts there, and games as well. So let's say we had more of these as such. Another thing you can do is say align dash content, and we can say space between. And it will maximize the amount of space between each of these values vertically. And again, you have space around, and you have space evenly, And then of course you have stretch. You also have center, flex end, flex start, and so on. Now let's say we want to order these in a specific order. I'm just going to do that, or maybe go space between, like that. So let's say I want to order these into a specific order. I'm just going to make these A, and then B, and then C. So we have different values here. We can then add style, order, and here we can give all of them a specific order, and this only works if you're flexing it with the parent. So here we could say, instead of being order number 1, we can make this order number 2, 4, 1, 3, 5, and this one can stay 6. Now take note, banana will now be here where car is, and car will now be here where A is. If we save that, you'll notice we have changed the order of which the elements are found in. So you can do this to order them. In our case, we could have done this in the CSS file, but then we would have had to add an ID to these divs so we can differentiate between what which div does. And outside of order, you also have flex grow. And flex grow specifies how much a specific item should grow. So we do this, it will all stay exactly the same almost. If we were to replace these ones with 0, then it will be its default values. If we were to just maybe make car 1, you'll notice it's bigger than the rest now. And like this, you can specify how much space each one should take up. And of course, depending on how much you make one grow over the other, one may take more space than the other would. You also have shrink, which specifies how much an item should shrink relative to the rest of the items here. So instead of flex grow, we can say shrink. And let's say we make this 5. If we were to resize this, then if we were to remove this wrap here, then you'll notice this car here is sized a lot smaller than the rest. Just ignore the fact that they're going off screen. And this is because we are shrinking the amount that this is allowed to take. Of course, we could have just hit 1 here, gotten the same effect, but if you have multiple values, so let's say we have 1 here, we have 2 here, then you'll notice this one will shrink a little bit more than this one. And so on. Shrinking is something you have to play with to really grasp and understand the concept. So I'd recommend maybe taking this as a little bit of homework and playing with flex, especially flex grow and flex shrink in your free time. See how it changes depending on what values you give each of these and so on. And that is that for flex. Flex is very, very powerful. It might seem very complex at first, but later on you'll notice flex isn't that difficult to really get the grasp of, and it's easy to use once you really dive into it. Flex is a great way to add mobile support to your website that might be too big to fit on mobile screens, or to just make things go from a column to a row, much simpler than a lot of other methods. In the previous tutorial, we took a look at Flex and how we can use Flex to our advantage, especially to provide a more flexible experience for those who use mobile devices. However, this is just one of the many ways you can use to make your website more mobile friendly. Another way we can do this is by using media queries. And this adds a rule in CSS that says once maybe a screen width is a specific width, do this with a specific element. Or if a screen is a specific orientation, do this. And this allows you to make your website the perfect website for mobile devices to be on. So to just give you a basic example, let's maybe have this here, and I'm going to remove the styling from it. There we go. So we have banana. Now we're going to have background color of red. So this way, what you can do if the screen is less than a specific required size, we can do this. At media, screen. So we're selecting the screen as the thing we want to monitor. And then in brackets, we can say max width. And let's say 600 pixels. So this means if the max width of the screen is less than 600 pixels, we need to do something. In our case, let's just set hashtag margin, and we can say background color to pink. In our case, our width here is already less than 600 pixels. However, if I were to resize this to be a bit bigger, there we go. Now, because it is bigger than 600 pixels, it will be red. But as soon as it reaches underneath that, it will become a lot smaller. And of course, the only reason my thing looks this big or changes to pink this quickly is because I'm zoomed in very much. If I zoom out, you'll notice it is red. If I make this the original size and I were to go like this, then this would be the actual 600 pixels where it would finally break. Another thing you can do is just remove this screen part entirely, save it, and the rule will still work perfectly fine. So if we go like this, it will still work as expected. I'm going to make this 300 pixels. That's a bit better, because that means, yeah, okay. Now this is especially great if you maybe need to hard set how big something should be. So in our case, we can say, if they have a screen bigger than 300 pixels, we want to set this here to be of width of 600 pixels. So at most, this should be 600 pixels in width. But once they reach 300 pixels here, we want to set the width to rather be 100%. And this will give it a more scalable width. So if we were to go like this, you'll notice it just stops growing at some point. But if we go like this, and you'll actually notice we can scroll here because it is actually overflowing. It's a little bit big, but this is just as an example. But as soon as we go like this, it is now no longer going to overflow. It is going to be stuck to 100% of the width and not stuck to 600 pixels as a number. Now you can of course specify more values than just this. We can go and say, okay, not just this, but, and we can say and we add more things. Let's say min height. So if the minimum height of this is, let's say 200 pixels, then execute this. So this will then follow both of these values. And actually let's make this max. Otherwise, it will kind of just be confusing. Alright, then in this case, if I were to open up this here, as you'll see, once both of those parameters are met, this will execute. So if this and this happens, then yeah, do this. But we can also add an or by going comma, and then going here and maybe saying minimum width of 600 pixels. So if the minimum width, that means if the screen is at least 600 pixels or bigger, then run this. But there's also this. So if the screen is 300 pixels or smaller width-wise and 200 pixels or smaller height-wise, do this. So this will still work as expected. But now also, once we reach a certain threshold, it will execute it again. So by doing this, we can really make your things powerful because it's either these two or this one here. Min width just means as long as my screen, or if my screen is at least 600 pixels or bigger, or my window 600 pixels or bigger, then apply these. Or if my max width is 300 pixels or less, or 200 pixels or less, height-wise, this one, execute it as well. But because these are AND, if I were to do this, and then to resize it this way, it will change out of that because these two are AND. When it's AND, both of the parameters need to be true. When it's OR, aka comma, when it's OR, only one of the parameters, either this one or this big one here, needs to be met. So if you haven't seen it yet, we have already gone through first tutorial where we did a couple of HTML, or we made an HTML page of our HTML skills. You can go follow that tutorial if you're still wonky on your HTML. If you're not, you don't have to follow that tutorial. We'll just be copying and pasting that code into our code. So you don't need to rewrite all that HTML. Also, in case you want, we also have a Bootstrap tutorial where we designed the website with Bootstrap instead of CSS. Anyhow, so let's get started. First, you want to go to my GitHub repo. Link to this is in the description. And you want to just download the zip or git clone it. I'm going to git clone it, but you can also download the zip and then just unzip it after you have downloaded it. Alright, so here we can just say git clone. Do that and it should clone it for us. Now we can just Nemo YouTube project. And this is just my file manager. So here we can bring this here. So first of all, if you want the code for the ending of this, you can just go here. There's the code. So right there for you. So if you just want that, you can get it. But if you want to follow along, you can just get yourself this code right here. So I'm going to go in here. In fact, let's copy this entire one here. We can say copy. And I'm going to go here, create a new folder. Or actually, let's paste that folder here. And then I'm going to call it CSS. You can call it whatever you want. I just like calling it CSS. And then here's our HTML. Now you can open up VS Code in here. So for me, I can just say code. And let's actually just go CSS. And I can say code dot. I have a VS Code tutorial if you're not good with VS Code. Alright. Now that we have this, let's first take a look at what we have. So if we open this up, now you might not have this option here, but you can just open up this HTML file inside of your browser. But I'm going to open it up with my live server. And we should see something like this. Now, admittedly, this doesn't look too great at first, but that's why we're going to write some CSS to make this look better. So let's go here and we can take a look at our code. So first of all, if we were to take a look at our first page here, Blogger's Paradise, it just has a bunch of blogs. So in the like and the dislike button, a couple of links to show us our profile, and then where you can create a blog. And in here, again, we can take a look at it. We have a main and there's all our content. We have a footer and we have a div with IDs. And here are the source. We have font awesome and images. And we won't be missing too much of this. Okay, now first of all, let's create a new folder called CSS. This is optional. I like to hold all of my CSS inside of a CSS folder. Some people like to have a style folder and then a CSS folder inside of that. It depends on your project, in my opinion, but I like to do this. Then I would like to create a couple of CSS files. First, we can go global.css. This will keep all of our global data, like what we want our website to have globally applied. So first, I like to go :root. And these are the variables. So this is our variables we want to use around the website. Meaning we can basically use text instead of having to type out specific hexadecimal values for colors. It can just prevent a couple of bugs and make it easier to change in the future. As an example, -- color -primary. So the primary color is #109 FC3. You can of course change this color. I just thought this one looked pretty good with the existing white background. And then -- default -padding is 1 rem. So whenever we want to add padding by default, I just want it to be 1 rem. because that usually is good enough for me. Sometimes I might mix it up a little bit, but usually this is good enough. Next up, we can have our global styling. So this will basically be applied to absolutely everything on our website. So if I were to go asterisk, saying everything, margin 0, padding 0, and I believe we can also increase the size here a little bit. So this will remove the margin and the padding from basically all the elements on the page. If we were to go back to the page, we won't really see too much of a difference because we haven't actually imported anything. Now, because this is global styling, we basically want to import it inside of every file we have. So we go to index. Here we can say at the very bottom, link, and here that actually allows us to say CSS. And we can say CSS/global.css. This will import the global styling. We can do the same for post, and you can do the same for a profile. Now if we go here, you'll notice that it did change everything a little bit, but not too much, luckily for us. Next up, I want us to have styling for this navigation right here. Because this navigation, I want it to be the same on every single page we have. So I don't want it to change at all. For that, we can actually create its own styling file. However, some of you might want to put it inside of global.css since it will be applied globally. And others might want to put them inside of their individual CSS files. I will just put this inside of its own little style. So nav.css. Not everyone is a fan of this specific method, but I like to do this just because it keeps everything apart. And I like having a bunch of files rather than full files with like thousands of lines of CSS. Alright, that also means we can import that nav.css inside of every file. Again, you could put this in global if you'd prefer that, because then you don't need to put an extra import. And then finally, we need to actually add a couple of classes and IDs to this nav. So here we could say ID, and I'd like the ID to be page-nav. Then for each ally element, we can give it a specific ID. In this case, we can say active-link. So this will be the active link, so the page you're currently on. This will change depending on what page we are. And that is really all. We just need to add those two IDs. We can then copy this with its IDs, and you can just replace it in each other file. And then now if we go back here, nothing will really change, as you can see, but now we can start actually applying some changes. To make sure this page works or the CSS file works, we can just say nav and background color red. If the background color is red, which it is, it means it works. Perfect. So let's first style the page-nav ID, which we have here, as you can see. And also, before I forget, this active link, as I said, it changes per page. In this case, it will be here with the profile.html because we're in profile.html. And here, it will not be. And actually, this is profile. So it should be here. This one here is post, not profile. So let's remove that from profile and put it here at post. There we go. So each one of them are on their own, as you can see, own ally, depending on what page it is. Okay, now here let's start styling. We can say padding. And here we can use our variable. Now take note, you should import the globals.css before the nav.css, just so nothing gets overwritten and it knows what it needs before it starts adding styling. So here we can say var --default-padding, and then we can do the same for background color, and here we can call this color-primary. If we go back to our page, it will now look something like this. We can go to #page-nav, and we can select the first UL element. To know how this will be nested, you just hover over it and you'll see element, and then UL. So basically the first child that is a UL. This is optional. This is just so we can actually use this. So you don't need this. You could have just done this, would have been perfectly fine and done the same thing. Anyhow, then you can say display. And this will make the navbar one single line instead of it going downwards like it is doing here. We want it to be one single line of content. And then justify content, space between. And then just to make sure we don't have these dots here, what we can do is we can say list style and make it none. This will make it look something like this. Then here we can say page dash nav li hashtag active dash link a like this. So what this is basically saying is we get the page nav, then any li tag with the ID of active link. That's why there's no space here. Take note of that. So any li tag with this ID, select its a tag. Meaning, since only one of these li tags should have this ID, only one of them should be selected. And the reason we select A is to apply styling to this A tag here specifically and not to the li tag. So in this case, it will select this A tag because it's in page nav with the li with that specific ID, and there's the A tag. And here we can just say color hashtag FFF. Now what this does is basically, so there's home, now profile is white, now post blog is white, now home is white. So a lot of times you want to do this with JavaScript, but in our case we did it very easily just using some CSS. So there's some cool functionality you can do with CSS. We can select hashtag page dash nav. And the reason we are always selecting page nav is so it never ever ever conflicts with any other styling on our website. This always makes sure it always selects the page navigation. Never anything else. A lot of people will just select an A tag, but that always selects all A tags on your website. You never want to do this. You always want to specify exactly what you want to change, because this will decrease the amount of times bugs will happen because some styling is being randomly applied to a different component or a different element. Anyhow, then we can say select the first UL element, select all the A tags in that unordered list, and we just say text, decoration, none. That should remove the underscores. Color, make them black. Transition, 300 milliseconds. This will just add a nice little transition to them. And then font style, italic. And then to make sure the transition works, we can copy this, paste it here, say :hover, so when the user hovers over that A tag, we get color, hashtag FFF. You might want to change this because currently our current active link is also white, so that's up to you what color you want this to be. Font weight, bold. And all of these will be applied over a transition of 300 milliseconds, meaning it will have a nice short animation. As you can see, now this is how our things look. If we go like that, nice short animations when you hover over it. When you click on it, nice short animations. And that's really that for the navigation. Next up, we can finally take a look at our index.html. So create a new CSS file called index.css. And here we can, of course, just import index.css. Note, index.css should only be imported in index.html. Cool. Now here we can close that. The navigation has been styled on all of the pages. And in here, we can finally take a look at the header. Now the header, we can give an ID of page-header. The H1 we can leave like that, and the P tag we can give an ID of page-subtitle, and the P tag here we can give an ID of page-featured post, and the header is basically just this part here. That's the header. And this should be good. We can then save this and go to index.css. And first, let's select hashtag page-header. and add a margin top to 0.5 rem. Text align to center, and this will just make it look like this. Next, we can copy this, paste it, and then go hashtag page-subtitle. And in this case, I don't really want to see the page subtitle anymore, this right here. I later realized I don't really need to see it. One way we can do it is remove it from the HTML itself, or in the CSS, just say display none. And as I said, that will just remove it, so that's no longer there. We get in, go like this, and this time we can select hashtag page-featured-post. Margin top, set that to 0.5 rem. Font weight, set that to bold. Font size, set that to 1.1 rem. And the reason I'm using rem instead of pixels is just something I've really gotten into the habit of after the last couple of years. I just always use rem with everything, except for some very specific scenarios. But generally, I prefer rem because it is just a little bit safer than using pixels, because pixel density changes depending on the monitor you're using or the device, so it might not always look the same on all devices. This makes sure it pretty much will look the same for the most part. And in font family, and you can put anything here that looks good for you. I'm just going to select the first one because I think that looks pretty good. Then we go back here. This is what our header looks like now. Alright, then let's actually get to the page body where the actual juicy stuff will start happening. And that will be everything inside of main. So let's add the classes and IDs, so we can just say ID page-main-content. Here with this ID, and all of them will have the same class, so we can actually select multiple of them, like that. And we can just select all the divs. I'm doing this by holding Control and then clicking. Go to the end of the div and say class equals topic-item. So all of them will have the same class. The reason we're giving them a class is because classes are for multiple items and ID is for one item. You should only use one unique ID for everything you want to give an ID. A class is if you want to apply multiple styling to multiple stuff. You should always keep that in mind when doing styling, because if you use ID on two different items but it's the same ID, you might get some weird bugginess with it. Alright, next up we can select this span here. And I'm just going to go like this and press Ctrl D to select all of the spans here. And that should have selected all of the spans we have. Yes, it seems like it. And for all of the spans, we can give them a class of topic item author. The next up, we can select all of the buttons. We can actually do this to make it easier to see. We can select all of the buttons. And all of the buttons will also have a class, so class equals topic-item-button. And then it'll also have another class, and this depends on what type of button it is. In our case, we're going to say like-button. So all of the thumbs up buttons will have this like button class, and all the thumbs down buttons will not have it. So in our case, we can actually just select this, and all of the buttons that has that, we can navigate back to, and instead of like, we can just say dislike, and if all went well, all of them should now have the same class. And yes, looks like it. Perfect. Now you also got a little bit of VS Code lessons in while we're doing some CSS. Alright, so that is all for this main content. Nothing will really change, but now they all have classes and IDs. Inside of index.css, we can now start with the body content. So we can say body content, just so we can split up and make sure we know where everything is. Because once I like to split my things up into multiple files, you don't want too many files, and this just makes it easier. Then hashtag page dash, oh gosh, page dash main dash content, which is right there. We want to select that and just say more padding var, and we can select our variable dash dash default dash padding, and this will just add default padding sizes to our main container here, which is 1 rem. Then here we can add dot topic dash item. This means for every topic item inside of main page content, we can add margin bottom 1 rem, background color to hashtag B9, well, B9, B9, B9. This is a nice grayish color. Bring in again, then add this padding there. Border radius 10 pixels. This would give it a nice round feel because more modern things are becoming more round. Transition of 1 second. And inbox shadow 1px, 1px, 5px, hashtag 000. So we're adding a 5 pixel spread here just to make it look nice and good. Now you take a look here. This is how they look now. If we refresh, now sometimes you get this nice transition in, but I guess in this scenario we don't. But okay, this is how they look now. Currently they still look terrible because we haven't really styled them much, but that is how they look. They also now have transitioning in them. We can then copy this, just remove the content, and this time we say dot topic dash item dash author colon before. So before rendering we want to go content and we want to add author to the start of this element here. So just to take a look, this topic item author, that is here. And that should be within O. My bad. Let me just select all of them. That should be all 4. There we go. So what we want to do is before this content starts, that's why we have colon before, we want to add author like that. But because we didn't have that in the initial HTML, it would be a pain to go add it manually back. But with the CSS, we can just add this colon before, and that will do this. So now all of them have author, and I should probably say colon space. All of them have author, colon, and then their author, as you can see. So I didn't have to add that manually, I just used CSS. Like a lot of these, you'll notice in the future, a lot of people will just use JavaScript for this, but they don't realize you can do a lot of this with just basic CSS. CSS is more powerful than you think, and it is more lightweight than JavaScript as well. Then we can just copy this, paste it here, and now I can add the general styling. So font style is italic, font size is 0.9 rem, margin bottom is 0.3 rem, and in display is block. The reason we're doing this is because span is by default a display of inline, which makes it kind of difficult to apply margin and padding style to it. So this right here. When we say display block, it will turn it into a block level element like a p tag as an example. And then you can easily add margins and padding to it without it doing weird styling issues. So now it looks like this. Without this display block, it will look like this. So there's no margin at the bottom. Okay, then here we can say dot topic item dash button. We can say padding 0.3 rem, margin top 0.4 rem. Now you'll need to remember padding is applied inside this button, so that gray area you see, that's going to be the padding. The margin will be outside of the button. That is why we add both. So one is to style the button itself, the other is to move the button away from the other content. Background color, hashtag 0000. The reason we add the extra 0 is to basically say make it invisible. This is another way of doing it other than having to specify transparent. Because this fourth value here, that basically is the opacity. So if we hover here, you'll notice the opacity is at the very bottom. We then say border, none, transition, 500 milliseconds, and font size is 1 rem. So now we'll see something like this. You already know why we have a transition yet, but now you'll see something like that. For the transition, we basically wanted to add a nice little transition when we want to select a specific color. Or when we hover over it, the color should transition nicely. And let's also add cursor pointer. This means that when we hover over it, our cursor should point with a finger. We can copy that, paste it here, and then we can say without a space dot like dash button colon hover. Now, as you'll know, this means that the item with this class should also have this class. The reason we do this specifically is to make sure not just any one of them with this like dash button class will get the styling. We only want those that have this class with it. And we just want to give it this color styling. And here we can say this like button, and we want to give it this color styling. So now, when I hover over it, it'll gain nice styling with a 1 second transition. Cool. Then we go back here. I actually forgot to add a specific tag, and we only need to add one, luckily for us, because here we have a continue reading link, which I think looks kind of terrible by default. So we want to style that as well. So continue reading, here we have that a tag, and we can just give it in class, because you might have multiple of these. Just because we have one doesn't mean it needs to be an ID, but you might still have multiple of these in the future if you were to work on this block on your own. And we can say continue dash reading dash link. We can then go here to index, say dot, and also just select all of these, paste it there, and there we go. We can then say text transform uppercase. We want to make it uppercase. Text decoration none. This is to remove the underlining from it. And then we can select this again, and then we can go colon colon after, and we want to say content question mark. So basically we want to ask them continue reading. So now it will all be uppercase, no underline, and there will be a question mark at the end. And then finally we can just style our little footer here. So go to index.css, scroll all the way down, and just go ID page dash footer, and we just added some default padding. And now we have this. Next up, let's go to your profile. Oof, this is going to be a harsh one. So here we can then open profile.html, and let's close the others and create a new file called profile.css. Alright, so we don't need to style the navigation. We can just close that. We can also import profile.css. And we only need to basically style this form here. So here we can say ID. That can be profile. In this field set, we can call it profile. ID, of course. Profile-info. Then this button here. We can give it a button of class edit-button. And we actually want to give this class to all the buttons that has this class. So this button here at the bottom, as well as this button here. So we just scroll to the button and we paste that. And now all of them should have that class. This div here we can call ID profile-font photo-container. And this image, we can give it an ID of profile-photo. And that's really all the IDs and classes we need to give. In profile.css, we can select #profile, margin 0.5 rem. Then we can give padding to the profile-info here. There's default padding. This will of course make it just look a little bit finer. We can then select this, and then inside of it the dot edit dash button, background color transparent, border none, padding 0.1 rem, and a cursor pointer. This will make the edit button look something like this, which I think just looks a lot better than what it did. We can then select this, paste #profile-photo-container. Then we want to try and align the image to the center of the screen, just because I think that would look great on both mobile and PC. So width 100%, so we're making the div 100%, not the image at this moment. Text align center, margin dash bottom 1 rem. This will do this, so it be centered the image. We can then select this and just select #profile-photo. Border radius, make it nice and round. Again, looks good, especially in the modern times when everything is nice and round. We'll make the width of the image 100%. Max width 500 pixels. This means if you're on a big screen, it's not going to take up the entire screen, which will be not really productive. So in this case, as you can see, but because we said max width 100%, if we were to resize the screen here, so go like that, you'll notice the image shrinks with our screen. So on mobile devices, this will look a lot better. And that is really that for a profile CSS, just to make it look a little bit better. Next is for the post blog. So we go here, we select post.html, create a new CSS file called post.css. We close all of these. And up here, we say post.css. Again, the navigation page has already been done. We don't need to worry about that. The form can have an ID of post-form. Then I want to split this input, or that label in this input, and these into their own containers. So that means we want div times 2. We want 2 divs. We can then throw them in there and take this label and text area, throw it in here, and we can remove all of the break line tags because now we're using CSS, so we don't need break lines because we can add them ourselves and decide when would be best to add them. All right. Then with these divs, we can give them a class of post-form-item. And for the bottom one, we can say ID for form-content. And at the bottom, you can just say ID equal post-button. Cool. Then in post.css, we can select the post-form. And we want to basically center everything. So let's go with 90%. We don't want to go 100% because that will look a little weird. So we say 90% just to give it a little bit of a margin. Height 50%. Position absolute. Since this is the only thing on the page, absoluting the position isn't that bad. But usually I would always recommend going for something like relative instead. But in this case, since this is literally the only item on the page, absolute won't really be too much of an issue. We can say left 50%, top 50%, transform, translate, negative 50%. And if you remember this basically makes sure the center of this element is in the center of the page and not the top left part of the element. Because this will make the top left part of the element in the center of the page, whilst this will make sure the center of the element is the center of the page. Background color, hashtag B9, B9, B9. We could have made that a variable too, to be honest. Display flex, justify content, center, justify items, center, align items, center, and if you may not have noticed, that should be items, I'm trying to center all of the content. That's what all of this is trying to do, in case you didn't notice. Flex direction. This will be column, because once we want to center all of the items, we don't want them to be in a row, meaning from left to right. We want them to be from top to bottom. That's also why we have two divs, so those divs can be in a row if we need them, but the content in the div will be aligned in a column, so from top to bottom. Padding 0.5 rem. Border radius can be 20 pixels. Font weight can be 20 pixels. Font family can be Arial, Helvetica, Sans Serif. Box shadow can be 1px, 1px, 5px spread, and in black. This will give us something like this. So everything's in the center. This here is in a row. This here is in a row. But these two content themselves, they're in a column because they are in their own divs. Next, we can select this post form item. So hashtag post dash form dot post dash form dash item margin dash bottom, and we want that to be 1 rem, width 100%, display flex, and this is to basically align the items in a row. It has 100% of width, meaning it can go from left to right, 100% of that width. When they want to center them, so justify content center. And actually there should be justify items center. Justify content should be space between, to add spacing between the label and the input. And then align items should be center. This will give us something like this. Doesn't look great yet, but we're getting there. We can copy that, go down here, say input. So we're selecting specifically the input. In our case, we're just selecting this element. We don't have any other inputs except for this one, but this one isn't inside of this div, so it won't be selected. So this here is the only input that will be selected. It might be best to actually just select the title, or the ID, which is title, rather than the input itself. But in our case, we can actually just select an element for once. And as you can see here, it will select this input inside of these elements. We're going to say width 80%, border radius 40 pixels, border none, outline none. Now outline is specifically, when I click here, you'll notice it goes a little bit black at the edges. That's an outline. So when you focus on it, it gets these black bars. We don't want the outline, so we just remove that. And in padding 0.5 rem, 1 rem, 0.5 rem, 1 rem. There we go. So this is basically top, right, bottom, left. And we'll get something like this. We can then select post form item again, and then say hashtag form dash content flex direction column. This will just make it flex from top to bottom instead of left to right. Then you can select hashtag post-form. And we'll just select you can actually select all of this again. And say text area. Border, none. Outline, none. Border radius, 10 pixels. Padding, 0.5 rem. Width, 90%. Margin top, 1 rem. And this will just make it look a little bit better than what it was, as you can see here. We can then finally select the post form and hashtag post-button, which is the button here at the very bottom. Padding 0.6 rem. Border radius 5 pixels. Border 0. This is another way of basically saying border none. Font weight bold. Box shadow 1px, 1px, 5px black. Margin top 4 rem. Cursor pointer transition 500 milliseconds. The reason we want the transition is because I want to add a hover effect. Background color black, and in color of the text white. So when you hover over it, you get this. And my bad, let's actually remove this margin top here. I did not mean to put that there. There we go. So now we have the post there, and if you hover over it, it turns black. Alright, and that's basically it. There's still a lot more we could have covered, such as media queries. So when someone is on a mobile device, we might want to convert this into a burger or a hamburger menu. Or we could have added keyframes to add more animations to the website. And I will see you all again in the next tutorial, whichever that may be.